Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was working a late shift for a courier company out of Springfield, running packages across a bunch of small towns south of the city. It wasn't unusual for me to still be driving around 10 or 11 at night. That stretch of work week was long, holiday season, and I was running on too much coffee and gas station sandwiches. It was a Wednesday, late November. Cold, clear night. The kind where the air feels thin and sharp when you breathe. I'd just finished a drop in a little town called Riverton and was cutting through back roads toward Pawnee, then Auburn, then eventually looping back up to Springfield. I'd done that route dozens of times before. I kept the GPS running mostly for logging my deliveries, but I didn't need it. I knew those roads. Only that night the GPS started acting weird. About 5 miles outside Riverton, it rerouted me mid-drive, saying there was a faster way to get to Pawnee. I figured fine, maybe there was some traffic thing I didn't know about, so I followed it. Except it put me on this long, straight county road I didn't usually take, and after about 10 minutes, it rerouted me again. Back toward the same road I'd already been on. At first I thought I must have clicked the wrong turn without realizing, but when I looked at the map, I was exactly where it said I was. The line on the screen just kept shifting, redrawing itself in a loop. I slowed down to about 40, trying to get my bearings. Out there, it's nothing but fields and tree lines, no houses, no traffic lights, no gas stations, just black fields on either side and the occasional fence post flashing past in the headlights. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just a plane, a pale bluish-white orb ahead, hovering low just above the road, maybe a half-mile up. I squinted through the windshield, waiting for it to blink like aircraft lights do. But it didn't blink. It didn't move either. It just hung there. I told myself it was probably a tower light I'd never noticed before. Except I'd driven that road plenty of times, and there weren't any towers out there. I kept driving. The GPS rerouted again, insisting I turn onto a gravel road coming up on the right. I glanced at the screen, then back up, and the orb was still there. Same spot, only now it felt closer. The weirdest thing was how the headlights didn't touch it. Everything else, road signs, tree trunks, the reflective strips on mailboxes, lit up when my beams hit them. But the orb stayed the same dull glow, like it didn't belong to the road at all. I eased the truck down to 30. My stomach had that heavy, nervous weight to it, like I just realized I'd missed a step on a staircase. I passed the gravel road without turning. The GPS beeped, rerouted again, now sending me left at the next intersection. A glance at the screen showed me a looping path, like it wanted to push me back into the same circle. The orb stayed, hovering just ahead, floating above the center line. For a second, I considered pulling over, letting whatever was happening pass. But the thought of stopping made my skin crawl. The idea of sitting still with that light hanging over the road in front of me was unbearable. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept going. About 2 miles later, the road dipped and curved. Usually you'd lose sight of anything past the bend, but the orb stayed in view, like it shifted position just enough to stay ahead of me. I could see the glow reflected faintly on the asphalt. No sound, no vibration, just that pale glow hanging steady. I rolled the window down a crack, listening. All I heard was the engine and the hum of the tires. The fields on either side were dead quiet. When I looked back at the GPS, the map was blank. No road lines, no arrow for the truck, just a gray screen with the little rerouting message in the corner. I smacked the screen once with my palm, but it didn't change. Up ahead, the orb dipped slightly, like it was sinking lower. I slowed almost to a crawl, heart hammering. For a moment I thought it was going to drop right into the road, but it stopped about 10 feet above the ground and just hovered there, perfectly still. I don't know how long I sat there creeping forward. Maybe a minute, maybe 3. The glow lit up the edge of the hood. It was dim but steady, not bright like headlights. More like the glow of a lantern wrapped in fog. Then, without warning, it drifted sideways, smooth, silent, straight off the road and into the field on the left. The movement was so unnatural it made my skin prickle. Not like a plane banking or a drone drifting, just a sideways glide at a fixed height, steady as a machine. It passed between two bare trees, their branches cutting through the light without dimming it, then kept moving across the field until it was swallowed by the tree line. The GPS blinked back on. The map redrew itself. My location arrow popped up exactly where it should have been, and the route corrected to the main road I normally took, like nothing had happened. I hit the gas harder than I meant to. Tires spit gravel as I took the next turn, desperate to get back to a road I recognized. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that orb behind me, but the field stayed dark. By the time I hit Pawnee, I was shaking so bad I had to pull into a Casey's parking lot and sit there with the engine off. The map looked normal. Phone signal was fine. Everything was fine. But I swear, when I finally worked up the nerve to look in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I thought I saw a faint glow on the horizon behind me. Pale, bluish white. Then it was gone. I just crept out my bedroom window, trying not to wake my parents. My street was usually quiet at this hour, around 11:30, but the second my feet hit the cold grass, it felt different. There was a sharp edge to the air, like it was holding itself back or waiting for something. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go down to the street or just run back upstairs, but I had already committed. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed it first in the distance. A low, almost synchronized barking. Not one or two dogs, but all of them. Every single dog in the neighborhood, my neighbor's German Shepherd, the beagle 2 houses down, even that yappy little thing next to the corner store, barking in a kind of tense chorus. Their voices cut through the still night, sharp and urgent, and then I realized they weren't running around or fighting. They were frozen in place, heads tilted straight up. I froze myself. It felt like I'd been holding my breath without knowing it. I followed their gaze. Above the trees, above the streetlights, something was moving, or maybe it wasn't moving at all. I couldn't tell. It was a shape, a shadow really, disc-shaped, smooth, completely silent. It blocked a section of the stars like a cloud, but it didn't drift like a cloud. It just hung there. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, and it didn't disappear. I glanced down at the street. The dogs were all sitting rigid, ears forward, barking in unison. It wasn't a sound that annoyed me. It was a sound that set my teeth on edge. The kind of noise that makes your stomach tighten because your body knows something is off, but you can't put your finger on what. I stepped closer to the curb, and that's when I noticed other things. My neighbor's motion sensor light flickered. Once, twice, then stayed dark. Then the street light at the corner did the same. It wasn't electrical. It didn't hum or spark, it just blinked. Everything else was normal. The wind, the leaves, even the distant hum of traffic from the main road. But the light's timing matched the dog's barking, like the whole street was synchronized to this shadow above. I wanted to grab my phone to record it, but my hands felt numb and my fingers refused to cooperate. When I finally managed to get the camera app open, I found that the screen refused to focus. It was all static, a gray smear of pixels, like the lens couldn't see through the darkness properly. I switched it to the front camera, then back again. Nothing. The shadow was still there, motionless above the rooftops, blocking stars. I tried to move closer to get a better view, but the closer I stepped, the more the sense of wrongness grew. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion made physical. I wanted to understand what it was, but my brain kept telling me, don't do it. Don't look too hard. Then something shifted. I swear it was subtle, just a tilt, a slight change in angle, and part of the night sky flashed behind it. Then it snapped back into the shadowed shape. My stomach lurched. I felt like I was looking at something alive, even though it didn't have features or movement. Alive in a way I couldn't identify. I stumbled backward, and that's when I noticed my neighbor's cat, perched on the fence, staring straight up like all the dogs. Its fur bristled, but it didn't run. It just stayed, unblinking. Then another neighbor came out of their house, flashlight in hand, murmuring, "What the hell?" as they looked up. They didn't wave me over, didn't call out, just stopped, frozen, staring. I got the sense that we were all meant to witness this, all at once, quietly. I wanted to ask someone if they could see it, but my voice wouldn't work. Or maybe I just didn't trust myself to speak without it sounding insane. I watched for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. The shadow didn't move closer, didn't grow or shrink. It just existed, solid enough to blot out the stars, but not enough to reflect anything. Then, without warning, it tilted slightly again, and in that instant it vanished. Not like it fell, not like it flew away. It just disappeared. The dog stopped barking instantly, the cat jumped down from the fence, and the streetlights flickered back on as if nothing had happened. Silence fell heavier than before, thick and sudden. I don't know why, but I didn't run. I just stood there for a long time, blinking at the night sky, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. My phone worked again normally. The street looked like any other night, like the last half hour had been a dream. I walked back home slowly, checking the sky at every turn. The shadow didn't return. I reached my window, climbed back inside, and didn't speak a word to my parents. I didn't even tell my best friend until days later, and I kept it vague. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, only that it was there, that it made the neighborhood animals act as one, and that it vanished before I could do anything about it. I've been back outside at night a few times since then, just to see if it was a fluke or some trick of the stars. Nothing like it. The dogs are normal. The cats ignore the street. The stars are just stars. But every so often, when the air is still and quiet, I swear I feel the same pause in the night, the sense that something could be there, just beyond the edge of what I can see. Something waiting, silent, disc-shaped, hiding the stars. I've never seen it again, and maybe I never will, but I know it was real. I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that the night hasn't quite gone back to normal since then. I got back from checking my trail camera just after sunrise. The sky was this pale gray that made everything look like it was covered in frost, even though the ground was dry. I'd set the camera on a little ridge behind my cabin, overlooking the clearing where I usually see deer in the early morning. It was a small, rickety cabin tucked into the pines, a few miles from the nearest dirt road. No one was around for miles, which is why I liked it. Quiet, peaceful. I unlocked the little wooden box I'd nailed the camera to, and noticed immediately that the lens had a faint film of condensation, which made me frown. I rubbed at it and shook the camera lightly, then popped the SD card out. Something was off, though. The infrared flash had fired more than once. Not just a few times, but dozens of times, almost in a rhythm, even though the camera should trigger only once per motion detection. At first, I assumed it was the wind, or a small animal wandering by. A raccoon, maybe, but the flashes kept happening all night, and I know the forest around there well enough to know the only animals that could get close to the camera would be deer or rabbits, and they wouldn't set off dozens of triggers in a row. I slipped the card into my laptop once I got inside the cabin. The first few images were normal, black and white night shots, trees, the occasional deer grazing at the edge of the clearing. Then, about 20 images in, something appeared. A blur of light. At first, I thought it was lens flare, or maybe the camera had picked up the reflection of the moon, but it wasn't right. The blur didn't match the angle of the moonlight. It hovered just beyond the edge of the clearing, right behind the trees, almost like it was floating. I clicked through more photos. The blur was in slightly different positions each time, moving slowly but deliberately. It didn't look like any animal I've ever seen. No limbs, no eyes, nothing that would indicate a living creature. Just a shape, pale and diffuse, like a reflection in water that's being distorted. I leaned back in my chair, trying to rationalize it. Could it be my head playing tricks? Maybe a reflection from the laptop screen? I looked at the timestamps. Each shot was spaced exactly 10 seconds apart. The camera hadn't malfunctioned that way before, and I'd been using it for years. Something had been out there, and it was triggering the camera over and over. I went outside to check the clearing in the morning light. Everything looked normal. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing that suggested anyone or anything had been there. The trees were still, the air heavy with damp pine. I wandered to the edge of the clearing and tried to spot where the blur had appeared in the photos. Nothing, just shadows and light filtering through the branches. I spent the rest of the morning wandering around the surrounding woods, checking the ridges and hollows. I found a few deer tracks here and there, maybe a raccoon or two, but nothing unusual. No tracks that could explain what the camera had captured. My gut started to tighten. That blur wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bird or a raccoon. Whatever it was, it had been there and then vanished without leaving a trace. I packed up the camera and moved it to a different spot farther down the ridge, closer to the old logging trail. I figured if anything came back, maybe I'd get another shot or at least see movement that made sense. That afternoon, I heard odd sounds while chopping wood near the cabin. Not loud, just rhythmic tapping. It didn't match the sound of the axe on the stump or branches falling. I paused and listened. Nothing. Just the wind in the pines, I told myself. But the tapping seemed deliberate, like someone walking across the frost-covered leaves in a slow, careful pattern. I went inside and stared out the window at the ridge where I'd left the camera. The light was fading, turning the forest into a mix of shadows and gray silhouettes. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a faint shimmer near the tree line. It wasn't a deer. It didn't walk. It drifted as if it were suspended. My heart kicked up and I blinked. When I looked again, it was gone. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak in the cabin, every whisper of wind made me think it was back. The camera I'd moved farther down the ridge started flashing again, this time without me even triggering it. I left the cabin's door cracked to peek outside, half expecting to see something floating beyond the tree line. But the forest stayed silent, shadows shifting with the moon. The next morning, I retrieved the SD card again. The new set of photos was just like the first. Blurs of pale light hovering behind the trees, sometimes caught closer, sometimes just at the edge of the clearing. Always the same slow, floating movement, as if it were observing. Nothing human, nothing natural. I called a friend, Rick, who's been hunting these woods longer than me. I described what I'd seen and showed him the images. He frowned and shook his head. "That's not deer, Tom. Not any animal I know. And it's not lens flare. Something's out there, and I wouldn't go wandering by yourself if I were you." I wanted to laugh it off, but the unease in my chest said otherwise. That blur wasn't random. It had pattern, purpose. The way it triggered the camera over and over, the way it appeared and vanished, it felt like it was aware I was watching. I spent the day cleaning gear and trying to keep my mind busy. At dusk, I sat back on the porch with a thermos of coffee, staring out toward the ridge. The air was crisp, leaves rustling softly, and then, just for a second, a faint glow shimmered behind the trees at the edge of the clearing. I blinked and it was gone. I went to bed early, doors locked, lights on. I dreamed of pale light floating through trees, moving against the wind, always just out of reach. The next day, I went back to the ridge. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. The clearing was as empty as it had ever been. The camera was fine, functioning normally. I've gone back since and nothing, just normal deer and birds. But I keep the memory of those photos, the way that light moved and hovered, and the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. Even now, when I sit in the cabin and the wind shifts in the pines, I find myself glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see that blur again, hovering silently just beyond the trees. I was 16 when it happened. It was late September, the kind of night where the air felt cool but not yet cold, and the leaves on the trees were just starting to turn. I had been hanging out at my friend Lucas's house, playing video games, and I stayed later than I was supposed to. By the time I finally started walking home, it was a little after 11. Lucas lived just 5 blocks from me in the same neighborhood. It wasn't a busy place, just rows of older houses with chain-link fences, trimmed lawns, and cracked sidewalks. There were a few streetlights here and there, the old sodium ones that gave off that pale orange glow. I didn't mind the walk. I'd done it plenty of times before. That night felt unusually quiet, though. Not many cars on the road, no dogs barking, not even crickets. I had earbuds in at first, but after a couple blocks, I pulled them out because I kept feeling like I needed to listen for something. I was turning onto Sycamore Street when it happened. 1 second, the lights above me were steady. The next, every streetlight on the block flickered at the exact same time. Not just one buzzing out, not a surge traveling down the line. Literally every light snapped and fluttered in unison, like someone had hit a switch. I froze in the middle of the sidewalk, staring upward. My first thought was maybe the power grid hiccuped, but it wasn't like a normal power surge. They flickered 3 times, evenly spaced like a pulse. Then they steadied again, humming faintly the way they usually did. While I was standing there, I noticed something else. The stars above me looked strange. It took me a second to realize why. A huge, dark shape was moving between them. At first, I thought maybe it was a cloud, but the night sky was clear. You could see constellations sharp as ever. This shape wasn't blocking them. It was more like it slid over them without covering them. The stars shimmered faintly through it, like looking through tinted glass. The shape itself was triangular. I could see the points, one ahead of me, 2 spreading out above the rooftops on either side. The weirdest part was the silence. No rumble, no engines, not even the normal sounds of the neighborhood. It was like everything around me muted. My own breathing felt too loud in my ears. I stood there staring, my head tilted back until my neck hurt. The thing moved so slowly it almost didn't look like movement at all, just drifting. I couldn't guess how high up it was. It looked massive though, bigger than a football field, maybe more. Then the lights flickered again. Same pattern, 3 pulses, each exactly the same length, then steady again. I swear, the second they steadied, the triangle glided further down the block. Not fast, just enough that it was suddenly farther away than before. I started walking, not because I wanted to, but because standing still felt worse. I kept looking up, watching the edges of the thing as it drifted. Every few seconds, I'd glance down at the street, making sure I wasn't about to trip on the cracked sidewalk or step into the road. When I crossed Pine Avenue, the lights there did the same flicker. Every bulb, all at once, like they were responding to it. The triangle shifted above the intersection, and for a second it was close enough that I swear I could see the outline of the surface. Not metal, not solid exactly, just darker than the sky around it, with faint lines running across. I wanted to run. My legs wouldn't move that way. It felt like if I did, it would notice me. The best I could manage was a fast walk, keeping my eyes on the ground more than the sky. When I reached my street, the triangle slowed, hovering over the block behind me. The streetlights on my road stayed steady, but the hum in the air didn't go away. I could still feel it, deep in my chest, like standing too close to a speaker. The moment I got to my house, I ran up the driveway, past my dad's car, and yanked the front door open. Once I was inside, I pressed my face against the glass of the living room window and tried to see if it followed. The street outside was quiet. The lights were normal. The sky looked the same as always. No triangle, no shimmer, no glow. Just stars. I stayed at that window for at least half an hour, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. But I couldn't shake the memory of those lights flickering all at once, and that silent shape gliding without blocking what was above it. I woke up because the zipper on my tent was shaking slightly, though the wind was dead calm. I thought maybe it had snagged on the fabric, but then I noticed the soft glow coming through the canvas. I sat up, heart pounding, and realized it wasn't coming from any flashlight or lantern I'd brought. It was something else. The campsite was in the middle of the Adirondacks. I'd picked a quiet spot near a bend in a creek, far from the road, because I wanted a real night in the woods. The temperature was cool, the air damp with the morning fog, and the forest around me was silent in that way that makes the quiet feel heavy. I glanced at my watch. 2:17 a.m. I didn't move at first. The glow wasn't harsh, it was pale, almost white and steady. It lit the inside of the tent faintly, enough for me to see the sleeping bag, my boots, and the camping gear scattered around. The usual noises of the forest, crickets, distant water, a hoot of an owl, were absent. It felt like the world had been paused. I grabbed my flashlight slowly, testing the beam outside the tent. Nothing. The forest was pitch black, but the glow remained, faintly visible on the canvas where it was strongest. That's when I noticed the orb. It was hovering maybe 30 feet from my tent, just above the ground, motionless, and it didn't reflect like a normal light. The trees behind it were swallowed in darkness, but the glow itself seemed to push the darkness away in a small sphere around it. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make a sound. The smell of wet pine hit me, and the cold air brushed my face. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of the shape. It didn't move as I stepped out. I took a cautious step back when I realized my flashlight barely illuminated anything, yet the orb's glow didn't flicker or change. It wasn't like any lamp or lantern I'd ever seen. I fumbled for my phone, aiming the camera at it, but the screen froze. The last thing I saw before it locked up was the orb holding its place, perfectly still, like it was aware I was trying to capture it. My thumb pressed the buttons repeatedly, but the display stayed dark except for a dim reflection of my face. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks. Sleep deprivation, the isolation, but I could feel the ground beneath my boots, smell the damp soil, hear the faint rustle of leaves as the wind shifted. Everything was real. I took another step forward. The orb didn't respond, didn't make a sound. I noticed the light itself had a texture, almost grainy, like static in an old television, but in 3 dimensions. The fog in the clearing seemed to thin near it, almost like the air was denser closer to me. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but my curiosity kept me rooted. I reached the edge of the small clearing, 15 feet from the orb. The glow bathed the tips of the surrounding ferns, but nothing else moved. No shadows, no wildlife, no blinking eyes. I whispered to myself, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "What the hell?" Then it shifted, not abruptly but smoothly, sliding maybe 5 feet to the right. I froze. The way it moved didn't match any creature or machine I knew. It wasn't flying, rolling, or gliding like a drone. It just was. Its motion had no sound, no ripple through the fog. I held my breath. I slowly took out a second flashlight and clicked it on. The beam hit the orb directly. Nothing. It didn't flare, dim, or respond. The edges of the glow stayed intact, the surrounding darkness untouched by my light. My brain tried to rationalize, maybe a reflection, maybe a rare bioluminescent fungus, maybe an animal with some kind of glow. But nothing in the woods moved like that, and nothing in the woods emits light like that, steady and unreactive. The minutes stretched. My heart thudded against my ribs. I considered running back into the tent, but I didn't want to turn my back on it. I felt like it was aware of me, not hostile, just observing. I spoke again, quieter this time. "Hey, I'm just camping. You can leave if you want." Nothing. The orb tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow nod. I had no frame of reference for that motion, but it felt intentional. Then it floated upward, silently, maybe 10 feet off the ground, and paused. My pulse raced. I could see the trees above it, the fog twisting around its faint glow. And then, just as gently, it lifted further, moving toward the tree line. I wanted to follow, but every instinct told me to stay put. I didn't move until it disappeared behind the denser trees, fading until it was gone entirely. The clearing felt heavy again, like the air had been pressed down on me. My flashlight revealed only the familiar shapes of my campsite. Nothing out of place, nothing glowing. I went back into the tent, zipping it slowly, and sat on my sleeping bag for a long time, staring at the spot where it had hovered. I tried recording audio, but there was nothing unusual. No hum, no vibration, just the soft rustle of the forest. My phone worked normally again, like the camera responding to taps as if nothing had happened. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, listening to the creak, the leaves, the distant wind. I kept thinking the orb might return, but it didn't. At first light, I packed up quickly, feeling eyes on me the whole time, though I saw nothing. Driving back, I kept glancing at the trees along the side of the road, expecting the faint glow to flicker into view. I reached the highway, stopped at a gas station to shake off the feeling, but no one noticed anything unusual. No one had reported any strange lights, any hovering objects, just me trying to make sense of what I saw. I've been camping there before, and since then I've returned once. No lights, no orbs, nothing. But that night, the cold, the fog, the floating glow, it stayed with me. I've tried to explain it away, rationalize it, tell myself it was a trick of sleep and fog, but I remember the way the light held its place in the forest, the way it moved with intent, and the weight of the darkness around it. I can't explain it. I just know it was there, and whatever it was, it didn't belong to the world as I know it. And every time I go camping, I glance a little longer at the edge of the trees, half expecting it to be watching again. I was driving home from visiting my sister in a town a few hours out, the kind of quiet rural roads where the only traffic is tractors or the occasional pickup. It was late, maybe a little past 10, and the sky was clear but heavy with clouds on the horizon. The fields stretched out on either side, dark except for patches where the moon caught the tops of corn stalks or a silvery puddle reflected the dim light. I'd been listening to an old radio station, nothing in particular, just the static hiss and low guitar riffs keeping me company. I don't know why I noticed them at first. I was passing a farmhouse with the lights off, and something red flickered in the field beyond. I blinked and figured it was a taillight from a car or a tractor, but nothing moved along the road. Then I saw another red light hovering just above the crops, maybe 10 feet off the ground. My first thought was someone had hung lanterns for Halloween early, or a farmer was using some kind of marker lights. I slowed down, pulling the wheel over slightly, keeping my eyes on the field. There were more now, maybe 6 or 7, evenly spaced in a line. They weren't flickering or moving horizontally, just hovering. And they were low enough that I could almost make out the shapes of the crops underneath. I had to double-check my windshield. Maybe it was a reflection from inside the car, but everything inside was dark. The lights stayed fixed in the field. I glanced at my speedometer for 45 miles per hour and tried to rationalize. Probably drones, I muttered to myself, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen someone flying drones in the middle of nowhere at night. And these weren't typical drones. They were too steady, and the glow was uniform, like a soft red neon, not a blinking signal. The more I watched, the more my stomach started to twist. The lights didn't flicker or shift. They were perfect. I slowed even more, creeping forward, and that's when I realized they were lined up perfectly straight, like someone had set them on an invisible wire. It was wrong. Nothing about the spacing, the hovering, the uniform glow made sense in any normal way. I passed the first one, keeping my eyes glued to the row. The closer I got, the more I could see the red was slightly translucent, as if it was a glow without a source, like liquid light suspended in the air. And then the field seemed to hum. Not audibly at first, just a vibration, like the way a truck idling miles away makes the air feel thicker. I could feel it in my chest, low, steady. I started wondering if I was tired or imagining it. I blinked a couple of times, tried to focus on the road, but every time I looked back, the lights were still there, lined up like they'd been waiting for me to reach them. The further I drove, the more they seemed to rise, slowly, almost as if noticing me. I gripped the wheel tighter when it happened. 1 second, the lights were hovering just over the crops. The next, they lifted together, rising in perfect unison. It wasn't gradual, it felt synchronized in a way that no person could have controlled. My stomach dropped a little and my hands went cold. I slammed on the brakes, not hard enough to skid, but enough that my tires made a soft squeal on the asphalt. The lights lifted past the treetops, straight up, and disappeared into the low clouds. I swear they vanished in a way that didn't make sense, like someone had just clicked them off. 1 second they were there, glowing and red. The next, nothing. The clouds looked normal, but there was this lingering red glow at the edges for a moment, faint and unreal, like a photograph left too long under a lamp. I sat there in the middle of the road for a moment, engine running, eyes scanning the field. No sound, nothing moved except the wind rustling the stalks. I turned off my radio. The static felt intrusive, like it was hiding the hum I'd felt before. There was nothing. The field was empty, normal. I started driving again slowly, glancing at the horizon every few seconds. The road felt longer than it should have, the empty darkness stretching in every direction. I passed a barn a mile down the road and caught my reflection in the window. My face was pale, eyes wide, hands still tight on the wheel. I wanted to tell myself it was drones or lanterns or some weird trick of the headlights, but my gut said no. Nothing about that was normal, and I knew it. When I finally reached the next town, the lights were completely gone, and the sky had taken on that faint gray edge of dawn. The clouds were still there, nothing extraordinary, nothing hovering, nothing red. I stopped at a gas station, tried to tell the clerk what I'd seen. He just laughed. Probably fireworks, man. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Fireworks don't hover in perfect rows, lift together, and disappear into clouds without a sound. On the drive home from the gas station, I kept looking over the fields. Every stretch of farmland I passed afterward was empty, normal. The hum was gone, my chest stopped vibrating. The only reminder was the memory of the glow, the uniformity, the impossibility of it all. I didn't see anything like it again. Not that night, not the week after, not ever. But every time I drive past those roads, past those fields, I find my eyes scanning the horizon automatically, half expecting that red glow to reappear. I don't know what it was. Nothing I've read or seen online fits. And I keep telling myself that for whatever reason, it didn't want to be explained. I got home safe, the lights didn't follow, and life returned to normal. The fields stayed dark, the road stayed quiet, and the world didn't bend around me. But I can't shake the image of those red lights, perfectly aligned, lifting together and vanishing straight up into the clouds. The thought lingers in the back of my mind, a small knot of unease that I can't untie. And I think I'll always notice it if I ever drive those roads at night again. I was walking Harper, my golden retriever, around 10 o'clock that night. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear your own footsteps on the asphalt. The streetlights flickered intermittently, the bulbs old and wavering, and a faint chill hung in the air, even though it had been a warm evening. I'd taken this route hundreds of times, circling the block before heading back to the house, and usually it was just me and Harper, maybe the occasional car passing slowly down the street. Halfway down Maple Drive, Harper suddenly stopped. I didn't notice at first because he's always sniffing everything, tail wagging, moving in fits and starts. But this time he froze completely, ears straight up, muscles stiff. I tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, boy," I said. Nothing. He didn't move. His head was tilted up at the sky, eyes wide, unblinking. I followed his gaze and caught it, something I can't really describe cleanly. A dark, triangular shape, completely silent, blotting out a section of stars above the houses across the street. It wasn't moving in the way you'd expect a plane or drone to move. No blinking lights, no sound of rotors or engines. It just hovered. Solid, but not metallic looking, like a shadow with edges. My first thought was that it was a low-flying banner, or maybe a weird-shaped balloon someone had let loose. I squinted, waiting for it to shift or move in the breeze. Nothing. I felt that weird hesitation in my chest, the kind where your body reacts before your mind does. I wanted to walk, to go inside, but my feet felt heavy, glued to the sidewalk. Harper wouldn't budge either, his head still craned upward, tail rigid. Then I heard it. A faint buzzing, electrical in tone, almost like a distant transformer. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the street, vibrating softly in the air underneath my feet. I held my breath, trying to place it. There were no power lines directly above, no nearby construction. The buzzing pulsed in rhythm with something I couldn't see. It was steady, low, a soft hum that felt like it made my teeth tingle if I focused too much. I glanced at the houses. Windows were dark, no movement inside, no reflections in the glass to help me. The shape didn't change. I noticed then that the stars around it were perfectly visible, like it was absorbing the sky behind it rather than reflecting light. I tried to convince myself to move, to pull Harper and keep walking. My hand shook on the leash. Harper growled softly, a low, hesitant sound I've only ever heard when he was genuinely scared. I whispered, "It's okay, boy. Let's just keep going." I took a small step forward. The shape shifted slightly, just a little, maintaining that impossible triangular silhouette. Nothing in my brain made sense of it. No plane, no drone, no glider. Too silent, too precise, too wrong. I thought about calling my husband, but then realized my phone was still at home. I debated whether I should turn around and run, but that would be too obvious, and whatever it was didn't seem like it would chase. Still, the buzzing grew a little louder in pulses, making the air feel heavier. Harper refused to move. I looked down at him. His hackles were raised, tail stiff, teeth barely showing as he stared upward. I forced myself to take another step. The shape seemed to respond, or maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. One corner of the triangle tilted slightly, and the hum seemed to rise in pitch. My pulse picked up. I didn't want to stare too long, but I couldn't look away either. There was a moment, brief, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, where the edges of the shape shimmered faintly, like heat off pavement on a hot day. Then it snapped back into perfect darkness, the triangle as solid and impossible as before. A car drove past on the main road several blocks over. The headlights caught the shape from the side. For a fraction of a second, I could see a faint outline against the clouds. Almost reflective, almost metallic, but not quite. Then the shape vanished entirely. 1 second it was blocking part of the sky, the next the stars were back. The buzzing disappeared, leaving only the rustling of the trees and the occasional distant car. I stood there, gripping the leash tightly, feeling sweat on my palms despite the cool night. Harper looked at me, ears perked, then back at the empty sky, then finally trotted forward slowly, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to tell myself I imagined it, that it was a trick of the clouds, the streetlights, or my tired eyes. But I know what I saw. The walk home was tense. I kept glancing upward, expecting it to reappear, hovering silently above the rooftops. The neighborhood felt different somehow. Too quiet, too dark, like the air was heavier in spots where the wind didn't reach. When I finally reached my porch, I paused at the door, looking back down the street. Nothing. Just the normal night, normal stars, normal streetlights flickering weakly. Harper sniffed at the porch steps, oblivious now, tail wagging again. Inside, I checked all the windows, doors locked, the house normal. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a flock of birds in a tight formation? Too high, too solid looking. Maybe a glider? Too dark, no sound. Drones, not enough light, not enough noise, not this size. I couldn't make it fit anything I knew. That night, I barely slept, eyes flicking to the ceiling, half expecting it to reappear outside my window. The next morning, I drove the same street on my way to work. Nothing. Neighborhood normal, dogs barking in yards, lights flickering in their usual rhythm. I've walked Harper that way dozens of times since then. Nothing like that shape has appeared again. But every time I take that route, especially at night, I feel the same tightening in my chest, that faint hum in the back of my head, and I know my dog would stop dead in his tracks if it ever came back. The memory lingers, and it's impossible to explain, but I remember it clearly. A silent, triangular shadow blotting out part of the sky, hovering there, impossibly still and pulsing faintly with that electrical buzz. It didn't move, it didn't speak, it didn't attack, it just existed. And that alone was enough. I was driving through the eastern stretch of Highway 84, the one that cuts through miles of flat farmland before the foothills start to rise. It was past midnight, and the sky was mostly clear, though a thin haze from the river fog clung low to the ground. I had my rig loaded light, nothing fancy, just a dry van full of packaged produce headed toward Nashville. The radio was off, the hum of the engine and the tires on asphalt keeping me company. I just passed a small turnout when something in my periphery caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a reflection from the moon on my trailer, but it didn't quite match. I squinted, slowing the truck to a crawl. A cluster of small, pale lights hovered about 10 feet above the asphalt, directly along the length of my trailer. They weren't bright, just enough to outline the corners and edges in this faint, almost phosphorescent glow. I blinked, thinking maybe I was tired or hallucinating after hours on the road. When I opened my eyes again, the lights hadn't moved. They were there, tracing the outline of my trailer perfectly, maintaining formation as if they were tethered to it. My first instinct was to call it in, radio the nearest truck stop or dispatch, but my hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't hear any engines, no buzzing, nothing mechanical. It was completely silent. I eased off the throttle, coasting at 35, and watched. Every now and then, one of the lights would flicker slightly, but the pattern stayed. I caught my reflection in the side mirror and realized my jaw had dropped. The more I stared, the more I could see the faint shimmer where the lights didn't exactly match the trailer. They seemed to float just a bit off the surface, not touching it, not reacting to the wind from my motion. At one point, I leaned out of the cab window, trying to get a better view. My heart was hammering. The night air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and the distant cornfields, and the hum of my engine sounded unnaturally loud in contrast to the stillness around me. The trailer lights weren't headlights or street lamps reflecting. They were something else entirely, something that shouldn't have existed. I slowed even more, coasting down to 25. I could see the horizon stretching flat, the fog clinging to the fields on either side, and beyond that, stars. So many stars, clear and sharp. I thought about grabbing my phone to take a picture, but my hands shook too badly. I didn't want to take my eyes off it. Then it happened. I blinked again, just a normal, quick blink. When I opened my eyes, the lights were gone. The trailer was as dark as the rest of the rig, the asphalt stretching on with nothing hovering, nothing outlining it. My stomach dropped. I rubbed my eyes, checked the mirrors, slowed to 20. Still nothing, just the stars, distant, steady, and a faint fog hovering low over the fields. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a farmer's LED drones from a few fields over, hovering in formation and catching my headlights, but that didn't fit. Drones don't hover perfectly in formation along a moving trailer, not silently, not without blinking or changing distance. And besides, there had been no sound, no movement from the fields at all. I eased the rig back up to highway speed, trying to shake it off. My mind raced. I replayed what I saw over and over. Each time I tried to break it down, it seemed stranger. The lights hadn't been random. They were precise, deliberate, synchronized to my trailer's shape. Whatever it wasn't just floating in the sky, it was reacting to me, or moving with me. The next few miles were quiet. I scanned the sky constantly, half expecting them to reappear, but there was nothing unusual. The fog thinned, the stars shone clear again, and I forced myself to focus on the road. I didn't want to imagine anything, didn't want to tell myself I'd just lost my mind. But the memory of those pale lights hovering in perfect symmetry along my trailer wouldn't leave. Somewhere past a stretch of open cornfields, a coyote crossed the road, darting off into the dark. My pulse finally slowed a little. I turned on the rig's interior lights to check the dashboard, telling myself it had been a trick of fatigue. Maybe a reflection, maybe some odd alignment of distant street lamps or farm equipment, but nothing made the lights outline the trailer so precisely. Nothing made them vanish entirely with just a blink. By the time I reached the next truck stop an hour later, I was tense, jittery, replaying it all in my head. I pulled in, parked, and got out, stretching my legs. The lot was empty, save for a few other rigs and the faint smell of diesel. I looked up at the sky. No lights, no patterns, just stars scattered and silent. I called my wife, trying to sound casual, told her I'd had a weird night on the road, but didn't go into detail. I didn't want to sound insane. She told me to get some rest, that nothing bad had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That perfect formation of lights, the way they had mirrored my trailer, how they had disappeared instantly. Something about it felt aware, attentive, watching. I drove the rest of the route in silence, checking mirrors obsessively, scanning the sky for any sign of them. Nothing appeared, and eventually the day started, fog burned off, and the sun lit the fields golden. By then, the memory of the lights still lingered, but the immediacy of it had faded into the hum of the road and the weight of the rig. Back home, I told a few fellow truckers, mostly joking about ghost lights or trailer spirits, but their laughs didn't reach my ears. None of them had seen what I had. I still think about it, though. Every time I'm out on a long stretch of highway at night, I glance at the mirrors at the road ahead, half expecting them to return. And sometimes, when the sky is clear and quiet, I swear I can feel the weight of them hovering just at the edge of vision, tracing, waiting. Whatever it wasn't something I could chase or follow, just a presence precise, fleeting, impossible to capture. And for now, that's all I know. I had been sitting on the ice for maybe an hour, my legs frozen through my snow pants, watching the tip-up shake every so often, hoping for a bite. The lake was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you can almost hear the ice settling under you. Snow had fallen lightly earlier in the afternoon, leaving everything white and muffled, and the sky was that deep gray of early evening, the kind that feels like it could snow again any second. I'd been looking down more than usual, checking the small holes I'd drilled and making sure my lines hadn't frozen when I noticed something strange. There were faint spots of light reflecting under the ice, tiny glimmers that shifted a little, almost like fish, but not quite. I squinted and leaned forward, tapping the ice with my hand. Nothing moved. No bubbles, no ripples, just the faint glow. I told myself it was just the way the sky was hitting cracks in the ice, or maybe my headlamp reflecting in some weird pattern. I shook it off and went back to my line, but the reflection stayed in my peripheral vision. Something about it made the air feel heavier. I glanced up toward the tree line along the far shore, where the pines were dark against the fading light. That's when I saw it, a pale orb, hovering just above the treetops, quiet and still. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a basketball from my distance, but it radiated this soft, cold light, the kind that makes your skin feel warmer in contrast. I froze. My instincts told me to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my curiosity held me in place. The orb drifted slowly along the tree line, moving from left to right, almost gliding. There was no sound, no hum, no buzz, nothing. Just the faint wind through the pines and the occasional cracking of ice under my boots. I checked my watch. Sunset had come and gone, though the horizon still held a faint glow. I tried to measure its distance in my head, but it didn't make sense. It didn't shrink or grow, just moved along the edge of the forest as if it were tied to some invisible track. I reached for my phone to take a picture, even though I knew it wouldn't capture the glow properly. As I tapped the screen, the image froze, completely unresponsive. Not just lagging. The whole screen just locked on the dim reflection of the orb above the trees. I waited, pressing the power button, swiping, shaking it gently. Nothing. When I looked back up at the orb, it had shifted slightly, drifting slower now, almost deliberate. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I felt a tight knot in my stomach, the same feeling you get when something is wrong but you can't put your finger on it. I tried to convince myself it was a drone, or maybe some reflective balloon someone had released, but the movement didn't fit. It wasn't erratic, wasn't subject to wind gusts. It floated like it had purpose, like it was scanning, observing. Then the glimmers under the ice caught my eye again. They weren't scattered randomly anymore, they lined up, almost like they were mirroring the orb's position above. I leaned closer to the ice, curious despite the cold numbing my fingers. The lights moved slowly along under the surface, following the same path the orb was tracing above the trees. My rational mind kept saying it was just reflections, maybe pockets of air, maybe fish, but it didn't explain the patterns, the way the spots seemed to respond. I considered leaving, packing up fast, but my boots were frozen to the ice in disbelief. I wanted to see what it would do next, even though part of me screamed to run. The orb continued its silent patrol along the tree line, drifting over the dark pines, moving with a calm, measured pace. I noticed the glow beneath the ice fading slightly when it passed overhead, as if it were dimming in response. I tried calling my friend Jason, the one who usually comes with me on these late ice fishing trips, but there was no signal out here. I muttered his name, half joking, half hoping he'd appear from somewhere and tell me I was imagining it. The orb didn't react. It kept moving, slow and deliberate. I felt exposed out here, all alone, the forest vast around me, the lake flat and white, nothing between me and the trees but ice. At one point, a strong gust of wind came over the lake, whipping snow around my feet. The orb tilted slightly, as if adjusting, and I noticed a strange stillness in the surrounding air. No wind beyond that gust touched the lake. My line twitched in the hole as if acknowledging the disturbance, though nothing was caught. The reflection spots under the ice flickered in response, brightening for a second, then fading. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was some natural phenomenon I didn't understand. Maybe it was a rare ice effect, maybe some strange atmospheric reflection, maybe even bioluminescent organisms I'd never read about, but none of it explained the movement above the trees, slow and precise, or the way the glow mirrored below. Eventually, the orb reached the end of the tree line opposite me. It paused, hovering low, almost just above the tallest pines, and stayed there for several seconds. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then it moved again, slowly retreating, tracing the edge of the forest back the way it had come, and the glow under the ice followed, though it was fading now, scattering into dim, isolated points. When it finally vanished from view, the forest looked empty, ordinary. The tree line just darkened against the fading twilight. The reflections under the ice winked out, leaving nothing but the dull gray of snow and ice. I sat there for a while, unsure if I should leave immediately or stay, trying to absorb what I'd just seen. My hands had thawed slightly, my fingers tingling. My heart rate was steadying, though my chest still felt tight. I packed up slowly, checking the lake's surface, the tree line, expecting it to reappear. Nothing. I walked back to my truck carefully, boots crunching on snow, ears straining for any sound beyond the wind and the occasional ice pop. When I reached the road, I sat in the cab, starting the engine, looking back over the lake. Nothing moved. The orb wasn't there. The tree line was just trees. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the passing pines, half expecting to see that pale glow drifting silently along the edge. The road was empty, headlights cutting through snow dust in the air. I told myself it was over, that it had been some strange optical effect, a reflection of sunset and snow, but my mind kept returning to the faint, circular glow hovering above the forest and the tiny lights under the ice that seemed to move in concert. By the time I pulled into my driveway, night had fully settled in. I left my gear by the door, went inside, made a cup of coffee, and sat staring out the window at the dark yard, trying to process what had happened. I could still see it when I closed my eyes, the orb moving slowly, deliberate, the reflections under the ice flickering in response, the wind brushing over everything without disturbing it. Even now, I can replay it in my head, and it feels like something that exists in the world, just out of reach, just beyond explanation, moving silently and watching. And I keep thinking that if I ever go back to that lake, the ice will feel heavier. The tree line will feel alive, and maybe that pale glow will be there again, tracing its path along the forest edge. I had stopped on the ridge just as the sun was dipping behind the eastern slopes, the air turning that cold orange that makes everything sharper, and I was trying to catch my breath. My pack had been heavy all day, water, granola, my jacket in case it got colder, and the trail had been steeper than I expected. The wind up here was relentless, cutting through layers, rattling my hat and tugging at the straps on my pack. I slumped down on a flat rock and rested my elbows on my knees, looking over the valley below. The forest stretched on for miles, dark and unbroken, and the distant river was just a silver thread. I had my phone out, trying to check the time, but it had barely a signal. The battery had been low all day, so I didn't bother to try calling anyone. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I usually liked it that way. Hikes like this were my way of getting away from everything. But then I noticed something that made me stop scrolling and stare. A faint glow, circular, pale like a dim flashlight, moving low over the tree line. At first, I thought it was some jogger's headlamp, or maybe a deer with a reflective collar caught in the light, but nothing about it made sense. It didn't follow the contours of the land. It drifted against the wind, moving a little left, then a little right, almost like it was floating. The trees swayed and bent in the gusts, but the glow didn't flicker or shake with the wind. I pinched my eyes and blinked, thinking I was just seeing things in the fading light, but it didn't go away. I put my phone down and squinted, trying to get a better view. The air smelled of wet pine and cold soil, the kind of smell that makes you feel like the forest is breathing around you. The glow moved slowly, almost lazily, circling like it was scanning. My gut was twisting a little, not fear exactly, more like unease. My rational brain started throwing out excuses, a hunter's lamp, a reflective sign in the distance, a plane too far to hear, but none of them fit. I reached for my binoculars, the old ones in the pack, scratched up and foggy. I rested them on a rock and adjusted the focus. The glow was still there, faint and circular, hovering a few meters above the tree line. There was no structure I could see, no movement besides the slow drift. It didn't look mechanical, didn't have blinking lights. It just existed. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes. My head felt tight, the way it does when you're above 1,000 meters, and your brain is trying to adjust to the thin air. I heard a branch snap somewhere behind me, and my body tensed. Nothing emerged from the trees, no animal, no hiker. I tried to tell myself it was just a squirrel, but the timing made my stomach tighten. I glanced back toward the glow, and for a second it stopped moving. It hung there, perfectly stationary, like someone had set a lantern on the treetops. The wind howled around it, tugging at the branches below, and yet it didn't sway. I blinked, just once. When I opened my eyes, it hadn't moved again. I could swear it had shifted before, drifting against the wind, but now it was fixed in place. I tried focusing on the tree line itself to gauge its distance. It was low, maybe 100 meters away, the trees at least 15 meters tall. The glow seemed to hover just above them, pale and circular, edges soft but visible even against the deepening blue of the sky. I sat frozen, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. My phone was dead, my GPS was off, and I realized I hadn't checked the time in a while. Maybe 20 minutes had passed. I had been watching the glow for long enough that my legs ached from sitting still. I debated packing up and hiking down, but something made me stay. The wind was stronger now, cutting through my jacket, and yet the glow didn't change. Then it started fading. Slowly at first, like someone was turning a dimmer down. The edges blurred, the intensity dulled, until it was just a faint wisp, barely distinguishable from the darkening trees. I blinked again, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. Just the forest, the wind, the distant river. Nothing else. I scanned the area, looked up at the sky, and even though the stars were coming out, I couldn't spot any hint of movement, any lingering trace. I packed up my things faster than I intended and started back down the trail, every step loud in the quiet. The woods felt different somehow, heavier, as if the air had a shape. My legs were shaking from the hike and the tension, and the sunset had long gone by the time I reached the bottom of the ridge. Back at the parking lot, I sat in my car for a while, doors locked, engine off. I told myself it was a trick of light, a reflection on my binoculars, or fatigue messing with my perception. But it didn't feel like any of that. The forest looked normal, quiet. The wind pushed through the trees the same way it always did. Yet my chest still felt tight, like I was carrying a weight I couldn't set down. On the drive home, the roads were empty, the headlights slicing through early darkness. I kept checking the side mirrors, half expecting to see that faint glow moving along the ridge, just the occasional car passing in the opposite lane. I kept glancing at the tree line in the distance, and for a moment, every shadow felt a little too deliberate. When I finally got home, I left my backpack by the door, went inside, and made a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the dark yard, trying to convince myself it was just fatigue. But I could still picture the glow, hovering just above the trees, moving against the wind, then stopping, perfectly stationary, fading away. My mind tried to place it in context, maybe a reflection, maybe a distant aircraft, maybe nothing at all, but none of it fit the memory. I slept that night with the window cracked. I didn't hear anything unusual, just the usual suburban sounds, but I kept seeing it in flashes when I closed my eyes. The circular pale light drifting, the wind cutting around it, the trees trembling below. The next morning I drove back to the trailhead, half expecting the ridge to look different. It didn't. The trail was quiet, the forest ordinary, no sign of the glow. I checked the tree line again, careful, slow, scanning every inch. Nothing. I started my hike as usual, trying to focus on the path, the rocks under my boots, the cold smell of pine, telling myself it was nothing. But every time I remember that evening, it's like it left a shape in the air. A spot where something moved against the wind and didn't belong, hovering just above the trees before fading completely. And I keep wondering if it's still up there somewhere, drifting quietly, just out of sight, waiting for someone else to notice. I had let Max, my border collie, out for his evening walk around 7:30. It was early October, the kind of evening that's just starting to lose warmth, with a thin layer of fog rolling in from the west. Twilight had settled over our suburban neighborhood in Easton, the kind with wide streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and a scattering of maple trees that were just starting to show fall color. I was the only one outside, Max tugging gently at his leash, eager to get around the block before it got too dark. Everything seemed normal at first. Kids' bikes were stacked in front of a few houses, and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of cars on the main road. Max sniffed at every mailbox, circling like he owned the neighborhood. I was halfway down our street when I noticed the first movement. A pinprick of light high above the houses, zigzagging in a way that didn't make sense. At first, I thought it was a plane, maybe a helicopter's light, but then it moved sharply to the left, stopped, darted back, almost like it was dancing. Max stiffened, ears pricked. He growled quietly, low in his throat, looking up. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw more of them. 3 or 4 small lights moving in coordinated, erratic patterns, tracing paths that didn't obey gravity or momentum the way I know planes do. They weren't blinking like aircraft lights, just steady points of brightness, darting at angles that made me blink twice. I stopped walking, tugging gently on Max's leash. "Okay, boy, let's see what this is," I murmured, mostly to calm myself. The lights moved slowly over the rooftops of the houses on the other side of the street, weaving between the trees. No sound at all. The fog made the air feel thick, almost muffling, like the world had pressed pause. I tried to reason it out. Drones, maybe? But I'd never seen drones fly that high without making a sound, and these weren't moving in straight lines or in circles. They zigzagged, almost like they were chasing each other or testing patterns. One shot straight up for a second, then vanished behind the trees on Hawthorne Lane, only to reappear a few houses down, weaving again. I glanced around, half expecting someone to be outside, maybe a neighbor watching the same thing. But the street was empty. Max whimpered softly, backing a step toward me. I felt a tightening in my chest, the kind you get when you know something doesn't fit and you can't explain it. I reached into my pocket for my phone, hoping to at least get a picture or a video, but my hands were shaking. I tapped the screen, trying to unlock it, and the lights did something that made me drop the phone. They moved faster, then paused, hovering above our cul-de-sac, almost aligned like a rough triangle. My heart was pounding, and Max sat down, tail stiff, not moving an inch. I called his name, "Max, come on," tugging at the leash. I wanted to get home, get inside, but my eyes kept flicking back up. Then, as I reached the sidewalk in front of our house, the lights shot straight up, vanishing into the purple sky. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone. No sound, no trail, just empty air. I unlocked the front door, pushing Max inside, and shut it behind us. The hallway light felt too bright, too normal. I breathed out slowly, trying to calm myself, and that's when it happened. Every street lamp on our block blinked once, like a single synchronized pulse. Not flickering, not failing, just one short blink, as if the neighborhood itself had taken a breath. My stomach flipped. Max barked sharply at the window, ears forward, and I looked outside. Nothing. The fog had thickened slightly, the street empty, silent. My neighbor's motion sensor lights hadn't come on. The only movement was the wind stirring a few leaves across the pavement. I checked my phone again. No messages, no missed calls, no camera pictures from earlier. Everything appeared normal, but I knew what I'd seen. I tried calling my husband, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I told myself he'd probably just turned it off, but the tension in my chest didn't ease. I sat on the couch with Max at my feet, replaying it over and over. The lights, the way they moved, the synchronized blink of every street lamp. Nothing about it fit anything I know. I kept expecting some logical explanation to pop into my head. Reflections, drones, planes, weather balloons, but nothing made sense. It wasn't playful, it wasn't mechanical, it felt deliberate. Half an hour later, I glanced outside again. The fog had settled heavier over the lawns, and the street was empty and dark except for the steady glow of lamps. Nothing moved. No lights, no shapes, nothing. Max had curled up beside me, restless but quiet. I went to bed, trying to sleep, listening to the wind rattle the trees. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I walked Max again, same route. No lights, no odd shadows, no strange reflections. The street lamps worked as usual, uninterrupted, the neighborhood perfectly mundane. I mentioned it to a neighbor, hoping someone else had seen something, but they just shook their head. No one had. Weeks passed. I drove by that cul-de-sac at night sometimes, and I swear the air feels different there now. Heavier, almost like a pause before the world resumes. I haven't seen the lights again. But sometimes, when I let Max out at dusk, I catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, just above the rooftops, and my stomach twists the same way it did that night. I've tried writing it off, rationalizing it. Maybe it was a trick of light, maybe a group of drones testing something. But nothing explains the street lamps, the timing, the way it felt like someone or something was aware we were watching. I can't explain it, and that's what makes it stick with me. I walk Max every night, and every so often I glance up, just in case. I'd parked the van at the edge of Bear Creek Campground, tucked between two dense stands of pines, far enough from the main loop that the only sound should have been the creek itself and the occasional owl. It was a clear night, October, and cold enough that the air smelled like wet leaves and frost. I'd been on the road all day, 9 hours behind the wheel from Denver, and the thought of making a fire seemed like too much work. I just wanted to eat something quick, curl up, and sleep. I had my little propane stove set up inside the van, windows cracked slightly for ventilation. Max, my German Shepherd mix, curled up at my feet. The van's interior light cast a soft yellow glow, barely reaching the windows, so outside everything was in shadow. I was halfway through a can of beans when I first heard it, a soft tap. Metallic, but not loud. At first I thought maybe a branch had fallen, or a raccoon had climbed up onto the roof. But then it tapped again, a steady rhythm, slow, deliberate, maybe one tap every 3 or 4 seconds. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. Max's ears twitched. He lifted his head but didn't move. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the wind. But the wind hadn't been that strong all day, and the trees around me weren't shaking. Another tap, and another. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, trying to keep the beam steady. The light swept over the van's roof. Nothing. Just the metal and the faint reflection of the moon. I circled the vehicle slowly, Max following a few steps behind, alert but calm. No branches, no animals, nothing. The tapping continued. I stopped moving. It was definitely coming from the roof, and it didn't sound like it was from a single point. Maybe around the edge, like something small but heavy was tracing along the surface. I crouched, ran my hand over the van. Cold, dry, normal metal. Nothing. I half laughed, trying to shake it off. Probably a branch, I muttered to myself. Tree ghosts, whatever. But then it got slower, more deliberate. I held the flashlight above my head and tried to see over the van, but all I could see were shadows. The taps had a kind of echo now, not in volume but in timing, like they were aware of me watching, pausing slightly, then continuing. Max whined softly, looking at the roof, and I felt a prickle on my neck. I grabbed a long stick from the side of the van, jabbing it at the roof. Nothing happened. The tapping kept going. I waited, breathing shallow, half expecting something to appear in the light. After maybe 5 minutes, I started to move the flashlight in wider arcs. I tried scanning the trees around, thinking maybe something was hopping between branches and the van. The fog from the creek had drifted in, making the shadows thicker, everything hazy. The taps kept pace, like they were watching, reacting to my flashlight. I decided to step back, put the stick down. Max stayed close, but not tense, just attentive. The tapping slowed again, almost hesitant, and then, without warning, it stopped. Complete silence. The kind that feels loud because your ears are used to the rhythm. I stood there for another minute, waving the flashlight across the roof, across the ground, trying to catch a glimmer of something. Nothing. I went back inside the van, closed the door, but didn't turn on the interior lights this time. I just sat in the dark, Max curled on my lap, listening. The night was quiet. The wind was steady, nothing out of the ordinary, but my stomach was tight. I couldn't tell if it was relief or anxiety. After a while, I started thinking through what I'd heard. Woodpeckers? No, too rhythmic, too heavy. Branches? Too precise, no movement I could see. Animals? Maybe, but nothing I've ever encountered taps like that. I tried convincing myself it had been a dream, some trick of fatigue. I eventually drifted off to a light, uneasy sleep, Max still at my side. I woke once during the night because of a shifting sound outside, like footsteps, soft and careful. I looked out the cracked window. Nothing. The trees swayed gently, moonlight glinting off frost on the branches, but no shape moved toward the van. No tapping this time, though. I kept the flashlight on the dash, but I didn't want to open the door again. Morning came slowly, gray and misty. I stepped out to stretch and breathe in the cold air. The van's roof was bare. No scratches, no dents, nothing that might explain the tapping. I walked around the van twice, looked at the surrounding trees, peered into the underbrush. Still nothing. Max sniffed around, then wandered back to the van, tail wagging as if nothing had happened. I packed up faster than usual. The road back to Denver seemed normal, mundane even, but I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting something to follow, to appear in the mist. Nothing ever did. Later, I told a friend about it over lunch. He laughed, said maybe I'd been overtired, maybe a raccoon. I couldn't argue with him. There wasn't any evidence. No camera, no mark, no sound recording. Just the memory, and even writing it now months later, it still feels unreal. But I remember the pattern of the taps, the way they paused when I moved, the way Max seemed uncertain, like he knew something I didn't. I've camped since at other remote sites, and nothing like that ever happened again. I try to rationalize it: wind, animals, maybe the metal contracting, but the rhythm, the timing, it never made sense. I've tried sleeping with the van lights on, leaving cameras out, nothing. That night, the tapping came and went, leaving only questions. Max still watches the trees sometimes when we're parked in quiet spots, ears up, alert, as if waiting for something to return. And I do too. I had been driving the back roads near Waverly all evening, dropping off packages in the scattered farmhouses and trailers that lined the county roads. It was late October, the kind of night where the air is sharp but dry, and the fields stretch out flat with nothing but stubble from the harvest catching the headlights. I was alone in the truck, the heater humming quietly, and I was starting to think about pulling over somewhere for a quick sandwich before the last stop. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a reflection off the low clouds. The way the truck's lights hit a wet patch on the road or the edge of a pond sometimes makes the sky glow weird. But it wasn't moving. Not like headlights reflecting on clouds or fog or anything I'd ever seen. It was a faint circular glow just above the horizon, off to the right. My truck's headlights swept across it, and it held steady like it was ignoring everything around it. I slowed, trying to figure out if it was something on the ground, a barn window maybe, or some farm equipment left out. But the light didn't match anything. It wasn't flickering like a lantern or bouncing the way a tractor's lights do. It hovered in place, almost perfectly still, and as I moved closer, it didn't change in size. My first thought was, I must be seeing things, but the more I watched, the more my stomach tightened. I tapped the brakes, rolling down the window for some fresh air, the cool wind rushing in, carrying the smell of damp leaves and dirt. It was silent, completely silent, except for the truck engine. I craned my neck, trying to see it better, and that's when I noticed a faint shimmer around the edges, like heat waves rising off asphalt in summer, but cold and steady. I shook my head, thinking maybe it was the fog bank I'd passed earlier, but there was no fog here, just clear night. I floored it a little, trying to close the distance, figuring if it was a reflection it would move, or if it was on the ground it would get bigger as I approached. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, the reflection of my lights cutting across it fixed. I eased back, slowing down, gripping the wheel tight. For a moment, I considered stopping completely, but my eyes didn't leave it. There was a subtle pulse to the light, not flashing, just breathing, almost imperceptibly. I switched on the high beams. The reflection brightened slightly, almost like it was feeding off the light. That made my chest tighten, and I felt my pulse spike. I've driven these roads 1,000 times, alone at night, and I've seen deer, stray headlights, the occasional firefly swarm in August, but nothing that stayed with me like this. Nothing that held my lights and seemed indifferent to the world. I tried calling my dispatcher, thinking maybe it was some other driver or construction crew parked off the road, but my phone was patchy. Weak signal, and the call dropped before I could finish explaining. I gritted my teeth, muttering under my breath, Okay, just a barn. It's a barn. But the shape didn't match any building. The glow was smooth and round, edges soft, hovering in the air. I could see a faint shadow beneath it, but it didn't touch the ground. I tapped the brakes again, moving slowly. As I got closer, I caught a glimpse of the surrounding fields in the truck's headlights. Everything was still and empty. No animals, no fences, no equipment, just black soil and low stubble. And the glow, still hovering, still exactly where it had been. I tried looking away, scanning the tree line, the road, the ditch, but my eyes kept drifting back. There was something about it that felt deliberate, like it was aware I was watching. At one point I flicked on the radio. Static. Nothing but static, even when I tried different stations. My mind started racing, maybe power lines, maybe some weird atmospheric reflection, but nothing fit. The glow didn't jitter, didn't flicker like electricity, didn't hum like a transformer, just hung there. I thought about turning around, driving the opposite direction, seeing if it would move with me. I eased the truck into reverse, heart thumping. The reflection stayed in place. I drove forward again, still there. I tapped the brakes lightly, trying to gauge its distance. It didn't shift. It didn't react. It just hovered, fixed and faint like a painted light on the horizon. I tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe I'd lost track of time. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on me. But I hadn't. My eyes were sharp, my mind alert. I could track the road, the ditches, the trees. Everything else looked normal, mundane. But the light didn't fit. It was an intrusion into the night, and I couldn't figure out its purpose. Eventually, I made the last turn toward the delivery point. The road curved slightly, and I expected the glow to vanish behind the ridge, but it didn't. Instead, it remained fixed, now partially obscured by a cluster of trees. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel, scanning the edge of the horizon. My headlights stretched across the fields again. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. It didn't vanish, didn't blink out, didn't float higher or lower. Just stayed. I parked near the delivery house, engine running, lights off, trying to calm myself. From here, the glow was just a pale, unmoving dot on the horizon. I stepped out, the cold air biting my cheeks, and walked to the back of the truck, checking for any signs of people, animals, machinery. Nothing. Quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling the bare corn stalks in the field. I decided to finish my deliveries quickly and get back on the main road. As I drove away, the glow eventually sank behind a low rise in the fields, but not naturally. It faded slowly, almost reluctant to leave, lingering in the corner of my vision for several minutes. My headlights swept over the horizon repeatedly, but it was gone. On the way home, I kept glancing in the rear view, expecting it to reappear, maybe hovering over the road behind me, but the horizon remained empty. Traffic was non-existent. The night was normal otherwise. My radio worked again. My phone got a signal. Everything returned to normal, except for that lingering sense of being observed, a pressure in the air I couldn't explain. When I got home, I parked in the garage and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out toward the dark fields. The moon was up, illuminating the bare soil, and nothing moved. I went inside, tried to shake it off, but the image of that glow stayed in my mind. Fixed, unblinking, and absolutely unmoving, like it existed on its own terms. Even now, when I think about it, I wonder if it was a trick of light, some rare atmospheric phenomenon, or something else entirely. I drove the same route the next day, and nothing happened. Nothing. But sometimes when I drive those back roads alone at night, I swear I see a faint glow just over the horizon, and I instinctively slow down, half expecting it to still be there, waiting. I was running along the coastal trail just past sunset, the sky bruised with purples and deep blues, the kind of evening where the light lingers just enough to see, but the shadows already start creeping over the rocks. I usually ran the path around this time. Quiet, almost empty except for the occasional dog walker or fisherman packing up for the night. That night, the wind was calm, the tide low, and the air had that damp, salty smell that always makes me feel alert, like the coast is breathing around me. I kept a steady earbuds in, music low enough to still hear the waves crashing against the rocks. About 20 minutes into the run, I noticed a glint in the water ahead. It was pale, almost silver, and it moved. My first thought was a reflection off something floating, a piece of trash, maybe a buoy, but the movement didn't match the current or the waves. It was deliberate, almost like something sliding smoothly under the water, keeping pace with the tide, then veering slightly as if observing me. I slowed, squinting against the fading light. My heart picked up, not out of panic, but that focused kind of attention you get when something is just off. The reflection moved again. Just a flicker, but enough for me to notice that it wasn't following the pattern of the tide or the wind. I stopped completely and pulled out my earbuds, listening. The waves, the distant caw of gulls, the faint hum of a boat far out, everything normal. But that flicker in the water, just 30 feet from shore, held still like it was waiting. I blinked, and it was gone. The water was calm again, ripples from the tide only. I told myself I must have imagined it, tired eyes playing tricks, a flash of moonlight on a rock. I started running again, telling myself it was just a reflection, but the feeling lingered, that weight of being watched. subtle but sharp. The trail curves along a cliff about 10 feet above the water, and I stayed closer to the rocks than usual, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The cliffs cast shadows into the surf, but nothing moved. My phone buzzed with a notification. I ignored it. But the motion of the water caught my eye again. Another flicker, a pale shape moving just beneath the surface. This time I didn't blink. I slowed to a walk, staring, and felt my stomach tighten. The reflection moved in a way the water shouldn't. No ripples, no disturbance, just a smooth, deliberate slide along the shallow edge. Then it disappeared again, leaving the tide calm as if it had never been there. I stopped walking, breathing shallow, looking for any logical explanation. Maybe a fish, maybe a piece of floating foam, but the timing, the consistency, it didn't make sense. I watched for a few minutes, moving my eyes along the water, but the coast was empty. The only sound was the waves and my own heartbeat. I tried jogging again, telling myself the shadows and water were just playing tricks. But every curve brought the same unease, the same feeling of being observed. It's hard to describe, not fear exactly, more a heavy awareness that something else was aware of me. At one point, I glanced down at the tide pool near the rocks and saw a shimmer, quick, subtle, a reflection too perfect to be anything natural. I froze. By the time I looked up, nothing was there. The water was flat, black in the fading light, except for the occasional white cap. I picked up pace, not running frantically, just enough to keep moving toward the parking lot. My mind kept returning to that flicker. A reflection isn't a solid object, but whatever it had been, it had form, presence. I kept scanning the water, thinking I'd see it again, and every time I thought I glimpsed it, it would vanish, leaving only the tide. Near the end of the trail, there's a small pier, broken in one corner, where people usually fish during the day. I stopped at the edge, looking back toward the bend where I'd first seen the flicker. The water was calm. Nothing. I crouched, peering into the shallow tide pools, even shined my phone flashlight briefly. Just sand, rocks, and water. No movement, no reflection. I finished the jog in silence, the breeze cold against my damp skin, eyes constantly scanning the waves. At my car, I paused again, looking at the water stretching into darkness. Nothing. No lights, no shapes, no shimmer, only the steady sound of the tide. That night, I kept glancing out my apartment window toward the coast. I kept expecting some hint of movement, some pale flicker, but there was nothing. The following nights, I returned to the trail at the same time. Never saw anything again. Not a flicker, not a shape, not even a reflection out of place. I've tried explaining it as a reflection of the moon, or a shadow cast by clouds over the water, or even a seal playing close to shore. But the way it moved, like it was deliberate, aware, watching, doesn't match any of that. I haven't gone back running alone after sunset since, and even during the day, my eyes scan the water in the same way, half expecting to see that flicker again. It's been weeks without movement, without reflection. And yet, every time I pass that curve in the trail, when the tide is calm and the light is low, I swear I see something there. Something pale, deliberate, sliding just beneath the surface, waiting. I know it's there only in a moment, then gone before I can fully comprehend it. And I can't explain it. Not really. But I know I saw it. The water doesn't lie, and neither does that still memory of the flicker, gliding under the waves, vanishing each time I tried to catch it. I was driving through the mountain pass late that night, probably around 11, maybe a little later. It had been raining earlier, and the road was slick, winding through tight curves and steep drops. I'd been on this stretch dozens of times for work deliveries, but this night felt different. The fog had started to settle in low over the ridges. A white curtain that made the trees on the edges of the road look like they were floating. My headlights cut through it just enough to see the yellow line and the guardrails, but everything else was gray and shadowed. I'd just passed the last overlook when I noticed them. Headlights ahead, 2 of them, bright and steady. My first thought was another car, which made sense. The pass isn't exactly crowded at night, but you occasionally get someone driving too fast, too tired, or just out late. But as I got closer, my stomach sank. The lights weren't moving. They weren't on a car. There was no reflection off the wet asphalt, no sound of an engine, no outline of a vehicle around them. just two bright, almost pure white points floating above the road. I slowed down, hands tight on the wheel. Okay, I muttered to myself, probably a couple of motorcyclists or some kind of maintenance markers. I tried to shake it off, but as I passed the spot where the lights should have been stationary, they split. Slowly at first, then evenly, one drifting to the left, the other to the right. My heart started racing, not in a panic way yet, but in that alert, hyper-aware way you get when something doesn't compute. The two lights followed me. No sound, no vehicle, nothing to explain how they moved. I glanced in the rearview mirror, still there, keeping pace. I floored it a little, telling myself it was just a weird trick of the fog, maybe reflections bouncing off wet rock walls. But the lights stayed, adjusting perfectly with the curves, maintaining the same distance from my car as if they were somehow tethered to it. I tried flipping my brights on and off, hoping it would reveal something. The fog glowed briefly around the lights, and I swear I caught the faint outline of a shape, like a dark wedge or maybe a glider, just sitting in the mist, following every move I made. But every time I blinked, it was gone. Only the lights remained. I took the next hairpin turn tighter than usual, thinking maybe if I could lose them behind the cliffside, I'd be free. The lights did the same. They mirrored my turns perfectly, staying equidistant from the road and from me. At this point, the panic was creeping in. My pulse was high, my breathing uneven. I kept thinking about calling someone, but my phone had barely a signal, and I didn't want to take my eyes off the road. The pass is long, with a couple of long straights between curves. On one of them, I got a good look. The lights weren't reflecting off anything, and there wasn't a vehicle behind me. I scanned the surrounding trees, the rocks, the sky. Nothing moved except the fog swirling around the lights, and then it hit me. The lights weren't just following my car. They were perfectly tracking it. Every adjustment I made, every shift in speed, every curve I navigated, the lights responded instantly. No delay, no wobble, no mistake. I tried reasoning it out. Maybe someone was messing with me, some prankster with remote-controlled drones. But even the fastest drones I knew of wouldn't stay that close at that speed in fog that thick for this long. The distance was consistent for miles. And the fog should have been a huge problem for sensors, for visibility. No way it was someone on a drone. The lights started moving together again, slowly converging above me as the road straightened. I slowed instinctively, trying to understand what was happening. My headlights caught something for a fraction of a second, a shape faint and triangular between the lights. I blinked. Gone. Just the lights, hovering in perfect symmetry. I passed a switchback where a guardrail jutted out over a steep drop, and the lights paused just beyond it, almost like they were observing, then split again, matching my maneuvers. I could feel every muscle in my back tense up. I gripped the wheel harder, telling myself not to freak out, to stay calm. The road stretched ahead endlessly, fog swallowing the horizon, and those lights were still there, trailing me silently. I remembered the old radio static stories my uncle used to tell, the ones about strange lights and hikers or drivers vanishing in the mountains. I laughed nervously to myself, telling myself I wasn't going to vanish. But the laughter felt hollow. The lights had a presence, like they weren't just lights. They were aware, tracking, responding. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that primal awareness humans get when something watches with intent. Eventually, the pass began to flatten out near the exit. The fog thinned, the moon came out in weak silver strips. I slowed, thinking maybe I'd finally be free. I watched in my rearview mirror, expecting them to follow, but instead, they halted. Suspended perfectly in the open space above the road. I took a deep breath, glancing back again. In a single swift motion, they shot upward, disappearing straight into the sky without a sound. No acceleration trail, no flash, just gone. The silence afterward was heavy, almost oppressive. I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, trying to rationalize. Could have been some military tech? Drones? Optical illusions? None of it fit, and the triangular shadow I'd glimpsed between the lights, I couldn't explain. It had been real. Solid in the periphery of my vision, enough to make the hairs on my arms stand up. When I finally drove the last stretch down into the valley, the road was empty, nothing in sight, no lights trailing me, no hum in the air. Just normal night. Normal stars. Normal houses beginning to blink their porch lights awake. I parked at home, heart still racing, phone finally catching a signal. I texted a coworker just to tell someone I was alive. Harper, my dog, was waiting at the door, tail wagging, oblivious. I poured a glass of water, kept glancing at the mountains in the distance. Nothing was there now, nothing I could see. But the memory of those lights, the perfect symmetry, the split and convergence, the shape fleetingly visible between them, it stuck with me. I've driven that pass since, late at night, several times. Nothing. Fog, rain, winding curves, all normal. But every time my eyes keep drifting up to where I saw the lights and I catch myself gripping the wheel just a little tighter, waiting for that impossible split to happen again. And in that waiting, I understand that something was out there that night. Something that followed me, watched me, and then disappeared as suddenly as it arrived. I was heading out to the fields later than usual that night, checking the irrigation pumps and making sure the fences held after the storm that had passed through earlier. The wind had mostly died down, leaving a heavy stillness over the property, and the moon was hiding behind thick clouds. I could hear the faint drip of water from the troughs and the soft rustle of leaves, but otherwise, it was quiet. That's when I noticed the windmill. Its blades were creaking, slow and uneven, like they were moving against the rhythm of the wind. I froze for a second, frowning. The windmill had been here for decades, and I knew how it sounded in different winds, how it moved when the storm had passed or when it was still. This wasn't any of that. The blades swung, paused, and swung again in a pattern that made no sense. My first thought was some mechanical issue. Maybe the tail fin had loosened, but the blades weren't wobbling. They were moving smooth, deliberate, like something was pushing them in a rhythm I couldn't understand. I walked closer, squinting through the dim light, the gravel crunching under my boots. The sound was hypnotic, slow and steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then I saw it. Just above the horizon, where the last line of fields met the darkening sky, there was a circular light. Dim, pale, almost like a fading ember. It hovered. Not a plane, not a drone, nothing I'd ever seen. No blinking, no navigation lights, just a perfect, still circle. I stepped back, rubbing my eyes. Maybe it was a reflection, a trick of the wet fields, but the more I looked, the more it felt solid, present. The blades of the windmill continued their strange rhythm, almost echoing the presence of that light. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but the screen seemed washed out in the dim light. The camera could barely focus, and when I raised it again, the light had shifted slightly, just a little to the right, maintaining the same height above the horizon. I started walking toward the barn, keeping my eyes on it. Every step seemed louder, my boots crunching against the damp gravel, my own breathing uneven. The windmill's creaking remained, steady, slow, not matching the faint breeze at all. I called out, just a half joke to myself, "What are you doing out here?" Nothing, just the sound of the night. I got closer to the barn and could see the edge of the light better now. It wasn't bright, just enough to make the shadows beneath it look deeper. I could see the tree line behind it, the silhouettes of oaks and maples. There was no movement below, no animals running, no cars or distant trucks, just that light, hovering, circular, calm. I crouched down behind a stack of hay bales, my heart thumping. It felt like something was watching me, studying the property, but in a way that wasn't aggressive. Then came a noise I didn't expect. A low hum, soft but insistent, almost vibrating through the ground. Not mechanical, not the windmill, but something else entirely. I froze, listening. The windmill blades seemed to respond, speeding up slightly, then slowing, like they were in tune with the hum. My throat tightened. I wanted to call my wife, wanted to get someone else to see this, but my hands felt heavy, and the moment stretched longer than it should have. The light shifted again, this time rising slightly, then stopping, holding that position. I noticed the clouds above it moving, almost imperceptibly, but the light stayed steady, as if ignoring everything around it. I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the hay bales. The sound of the hum faded almost immediately, and the blades slowed, returning to the rhythm of the wind, or what little wind there was. The light stayed, hovering, quiet, circular, just beyond the horizon. I went to the farmhouse, leaving the windmill behind, but the light stayed in view from the porch. I could see it from the kitchen window later, dim but persistent. I tried to think of everything it could be, an experimental plane, a reflection of the moon, someone messing with lights, but nothing fit. It moved too deliberately, held position too steadily, and interacted with the windmill in ways that made no sense. I kept an eye on it for nearly an hour, pacing back and forth on the porch. Then it started to rise slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it blended with the clouds above. I strained my eyes, but it disappeared entirely, leaving only the dark horizon. The windmill was quiet now, moving with the faint breeze as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep much that night, listening for the creak of the blades or the hum in the wind. Over the next few nights, I checked, hoping it was some fluke, a trick of light, or a mechanical problem. The windmill moved normally. The horizon stayed empty, but I know what I saw. I can't explain the rhythm of the blades or the hovering circle of pale light that night. It wasn't a plane, a drone, or anything I've seen on the farm. I still watch the horizon when I walk through the fields at dusk, half expecting a flicker, a glow, or that soft hum to return. And every time the windmill creaks just a little off its usual rhythm, I stop, squint, and check the horizon, waiting for something I can't name to show itself again. I don't know if it was a natural phenomenon, a human experiment, or something else entirely. But that night, the windmill didn't lie, and neither did that hovering light. And even weeks later, the memory of both feels like it's still out there somewhere, just beyond the horizon, waiting. We were out in the clearing behind Nate's family cabin, lying on our backs on a couple of old blankets, staring at the sky. It was late summer, hot enough that we were still in shorts and t-shirts at midnight. A kind of night where the crickets never quit and the smell of grass hangs heavy. There was no moon, just an endless spread of stars, and we'd all brought binoculars and a few cheap telescopes because, I don't know, we thought it would make us feel smarter. I was sprawled next to my friend Lila, who had this ridiculous habit of pointing out every constellation like she'd memorized the night sky from a guidebook. "See that?" she whispered. "That little dipper? Perfect angle tonight." I nodded, half paying attention, letting my eyes wander. Then I noticed it. One of the stars, a faint point toward the east, seemed wrong. At first I thought it was my eyes, or maybe a plane, but it didn't have the little blinking light. It was steady, too small and sharp to be a plane or helicopter. And then, impossibly, it moved, not across the sky like a satellite or plane. It dropped, straight down. Guys," I said, nudging Nate. He groaned but sat up. "What?" "Look," I said, pointing. Lila followed my finger and froze. Her jaw went tight, and for once she didn't launch into a constellation lecture. Nate squinted, then frowned. "That's not falling, is it?" The star, or whatever it was, slowed as it got closer to the tree line and then hovered maybe 100 feet above the field. It was glowing brighter now, not like any flashlight or lantern I'd ever seen. The light was soft, white, almost pale blue at the edges, and it didn't illuminate the grass beneath it the way a normal light would. The air didn't shimmer or ripple, it just hung there, and the field felt heavier. We were all quiet. Even the crickets seemed to shut up, or maybe we just didn't hear them over the thudding of our own hearts. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I got the camera open. The screen stayed black, like it refused to show what was in front of me. "What is that?" Lila whispered. I shrugged. I had no idea. Nate grabbed a flashlight and flicked it on, trying to get a better look. The beam hit it, and it didn't react. Didn't flicker, didn't flare, nothing. It just floated there, steady. We watched for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt longer. It didn't make a sound. Not a hum, not a whistle, nothing. Just light, and the way the air around it felt different, denser somehow. I noticed that it wasn't perfectly round. It had this very subtle shape, almost like a flattened sphere, a little wider than it was tall. The edges weren't sharp, more like it was outlined by a thin mist of light, which made it look like it was hovering in its own tiny bubble of air. I remember thinking, okay, this is definitely not a drone, not even close. Then, suddenly, it brightened. Not a flash, just a slow intensifying glow like someone turned up the dimmer. The three of us flinched a little, instinctively, and then it shot east. Straight across the horizon, no sound, no delay, nothing like anything I've ever seen move. I lost track of it in a few seconds, though the speed felt impossible, like it had vanished entirely into the night. For a moment, we just sat there, frozen. Nobody said anything. The field seemed normal again, but somehow quieter, emptier. The crickets came back, hesitant at first, like they weren't sure if it was safe. Lila finally whispered, "Did that just happen?" I nodded. Nate shook his head. "I don't know. He waved a hand. It didn't make any sense." We debated for the next hour, lying back on the blankets. Planes, satellites, meteorites, UFOs, I don't know. None of it fit. There was no sound, no contrail, no heat signature we could detect. And the speed it accelerated at was ridiculous. The more we tried to explain it, the less sense it made. We even went back to the spot where it had hovered, looking for anything unusual on the grass or in the dirt. Nothing. No scorch marks, no footprints, nothing. By the time we finally packed up, maybe 2 in the morning, the sky had started to lighten slightly with a hint of pre-dawn gray. We didn't see it again. The rest of the drive back to our homes was quiet. Lila kept looking out the car window like she expected it to appear over the tree line again, but the field was empty, the horizon clear. The next day, we tried to rationalize it. A drone? Too far out and no sound. A plane? No. A meteor? Wrong trajectory and speed. A hallucination? Maybe, but 3 of us saw it. We each told the story separately, and it lined up. I went back to the clearing a week later with a better camera this time, hoping to maybe capture something, but nothing unusual appeared. The field looked normal, the trees the same, the sky scattered with stars. I still think about that night. Every time I lie down somewhere with the sky open, my eyes drift east without me thinking about it, like half expecting the glow to return. It didn't. Not in the following nights, and I haven't seen anything like it since. But that feeling, the way the air felt when the light hovered, the weight of it above the field, the acceleration that defied everything I know about physics, it stays with me. I don't have answers. I don't know what it was. I just know it happened. And whatever it was, it didn't belong to the world we live in. And somehow, watching it disappear silently into the horizon, I understood that we weren't supposed to. I had been driving the plow all night, trying to keep the stretch of Highway 312 clear. It's a narrow, winding road that snakes through the northern part of Vermont, and this storm had been relentless. Thick snow, wind gusts over 30 miles per hour, and near zero visibility. Most drivers had called it quits hours ago, but I'd promised the town I'd keep the road open. It was around 3:40 a.m., the kind of hour where the world outside feels entirely separate, almost unreal. The headlights cut through the blowing snow, but only barely. My side mirrors were speckled with ice, and I had to lean forward to see down the plowed lane. That's when I noticed it. A bright light, like a handheld spotlight, floating ahead of me. I squinted. At first, I thought it was another plow or a car stranded on the shoulder, but there was nothing. No shape, no shadow, just a round, glaring white light, maybe the size of a basketball held at arm's length. It was stationary relative to the trees on either side, hovering slightly above the ground, but as I drove, it moved to keep pace. I blinked, shook my head, thinking exhaustion was getting to me. I'd been out since 10 p.m., caffeine fading, the cold seeping through my gloves, but the light didn't disappear. I tried turning off the plow's auxiliary lights to reduce glare, but it stayed there, moving with me, perfectly matched. I called in over the radio, "Dispatch, any other plows out there? Anyone seeing a light?" Nothing. Just static. I slowed down to 30, watching the snow swirl around the light. It didn't flicker like headlights or reflect off the snow in a normal way. It just glowed steadily, almost as if the storm wasn't touching it. I tried turning onto a side road, thinking maybe it was following the main highway, but it followed, keeping the same distance above the snow. The road bent sharply near a ridge, and I had to brake to avoid sliding. The light followed the curve perfectly, maintaining the same pace. I felt a weird sensation, like the air around it was denser, heavier. The snowflakes seemed to thin near it, or maybe that was just my eyes tricking me. I pulled the truck over on a small turnout, heart hammering. My hands gripped the wheel tight, trying to get a better look. The light halted too, hovering silently maybe 20 feet away, its edges blurred by the storm. I tried my headlights, flicking them on and off. No reaction. I revved the engine, leaned out the window. Nothing moved, not a flake of snow disturbed around it. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but the screen froze, flickering between my camera app and the home screen. The static in the storm made it hard to focus anyway, but the phone didn't respond. It felt like the device itself was resisting, as though the light somehow affected electronics. The snowplow was warm inside, heater on full, but the eerie cold of the light seemed to seep through the cab, like it was radiating something different from the storm. I noticed small details. Tree branches bowing under the snow, but they cast no shadows from the light. It was as if the glow existed outside the rules of reflection and physics. After a few minutes, the light began to fade, slowly dimming, until it disappeared completely into the swirling snow. The world returned to normal, the road blanketed in white, the wind gusting, the headlights cutting through nothing but snow. I exhaled, though my chest felt tight, and sat there a while, just listening to the wind. I restarted the plow and drove the rest of the route. For the next 10 miles, I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting it to reappear, but it didn't. The night went on normally, snow blowing across the asphalt, nothing out of place. When I got back to the garage around 6 a.m., I tried calling the morning dispatch. No one had reported anything unusual. I checked local traffic cams on my phone. No lights, no reflections, no signs of anything hovering. Just me and the cleared highway. I told a few coworkers about it, cautious not to sound crazy. Some laughed, some said it was likely fatigue or snow glare. But I know what I saw. The light wasn't a vehicle, drone, or any kind of reflection. It behaved like nothing I've ever seen, moving perfectly in time with me, stopping when I stopped, fading into the storm on its own. For the next few days, I kept thinking about it. Driving other plows, running other routes, I'd catch glimpses in the corner of my eye, a flash of white against dark trees, a reflection in my side mirror that vanished before I could focus. Always gone when I turned to look. The snowstorm that night eventually became part of a bigger system, covering much of the Northeast, but I never saw anything like that again. Not that specific light, at least. I keep driving, plowing, calling into dispatch. Life goes on, but every time the wind howls through the cab, I can't shake the feeling that something was out there, moving with me, silently, just beyond the edge of perception. I've considered cameras on the cab, night vision, recording devices, but I don't think I'd capture it. That light didn't behave like anything that exists in ordinary experience. It wasn't aggressive, it didn't make a sound, it didn't move like a normal object. It was just there, keeping pace, aware, and then gone. Some nights, driving empty roads through storms, I find myself glancing to the tree line or the space just above the asphalt, half expecting it to be there again. And while it hasn't returned, I know I didn't imagine it. Whatever that light was, it followed rules I don't understand, perfectly, patiently, and silently, like it was aware of me the whole time. I was out in the backyard that evening, weeding the flower beds and trying to get a little peace before dinner. The air was sticky, late July in central Oregon, and the sun was just starting to dip behind the pines at the edge of the property. I had earbuds in, half listening to a playlist I'd played 100 times, the other half just enjoying the quiet hum of cicadas and distant cars. At first, it was just the static, a low, crackling sound, like a radio between stations. I pulled one earbud out and tapped the cord, thinking maybe it was my phone acting up. The sound didn't stop. It got louder for a moment, then quiet again, almost rhythmic. I frowned, staring at the flower bed I'd been kneeling in. It was strange, but not alarming. Then I looked up. At the very top of the trees lining my backyard, a dark shape was moving, or maybe it was just hanging there. I froze, trying to focus. It was hard to tell because it wasn't like a bird or a drone. The edges were wrong somehow. The shape seemed to rotate slowly, like it was spinning on an invisible axis. But there was no sound, no wind, no humming, nothing. It just hovered, turning very slowly above the treetops. I blinked, and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The static in my earbuds had returned, pulsing softly in time with the faint movement I thought I saw. There was a weird vibration, almost like my chest was sinking with it. I got to my feet, stepping back toward the house, trying to get a better angle. Maybe it had just been a bird glinting in the dying sunlight, I told myself. It appeared again, just for a second. The dark shape, slowly spinning, staying level with the tops of the trees. I could see its edges clearer this time, though I couldn't say exactly what they were. Angular, maybe, but not rigid. Something about it made my stomach tense. I reached for my phone, but the screen had frozen. Not just locked, but completely unresponsive, like it didn't exist. The earbuds still buzzed with that low static. I tried to call my husband, but there was no dial tone. The cell tower must have been fine. We'd had calls earlier that day. My voice felt tight as I whispered his name, half expecting the thing to react. I stepped closer to the fence, squinting through the last of the sunlight, and the object tilted slightly. It caught a glint of the remaining light, brief, almost like polished metal, and then it was gone again, leaving only the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I stayed still for a long time, thinking maybe I was imagining it. The next half hour was weird. I tried to focus on the garden, on pulling weeds, on trimming the roses, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The static came and went, sometimes in one ear, sometimes in both. Every shadow seemed to stretch differently, like the evening light was bending around something unseen. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see movement along the tree line, but the yard was empty. I went inside, closed the door, and tried to rationalize it. Drones are quiet, I thought, but they usually have lights. Birds don't hover silently for minutes, rotating in place. I replayed it in my head, trying to pin down what I'd seen, but it slipped away like smoke. I told myself it was probably just a trick of the light, fatigue, something I misperceived. But that night when I went to bed, I could hear a faint static in my ears whenever the house was quiet. Not the earbuds anymore. Just there. I kept imagining the shape above the trees, spinning slowly, turning without sound. Every shadow in the room felt a little wrong. I checked the windows a few times. Nothing. The treetops outside were still, black against the night sky, no sign of movement. The next morning, I went back outside with my phone in hand. Nothing. Not a trace of the shape, not a hint of glint. The flower beds were as I left them. My earbuds worked fine, no static. I checked the photos I'd taken earlier while gardening, hoping maybe I'd accidentally caught something. Nothing unusual. Just the plants, the trees, the fence. I went back to my routine, watering and pruning, but I kept glancing up. Every cloud, every shifting shadow felt like it might hide that shape. Weeks later, I still pause when the light hits the trees just right, wondering if I'll catch it again. I sometimes think about how precise it was, the way it spun, how it vanished instantly when I blinked. I've tried talking to friends, casually mentioning the static, the shape in the trees. They nod, smile politely, tell me I must have been tired or imagining things. But it doesn't feel imagined. Not really. I felt it, saw it, heard that impossible static sync up with it. And sometimes when the evening is just right and the sky is fading from gold to deep blue, I find myself in the yard again, earbuds in, listening to the quiet hum of the air, wondering if it'll appear. Hovering just above the treetops, spinning slowly, waiting for me to notice again. I was driving with Jen across the desert late that night. We'd left Vegas hours ago, heading toward Flagstaff, and the highway was empty except for our headlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside the car felt thick, humid from the AC struggling in the heat, and there was this kind of quiet between us. Comfortable at first, then tense, like the kind of quiet where your brain starts noticing things you normally ignore. I noticed it first, out the passenger side window. A faint light hovering near the horizon, low to the ground, maybe just above the distant hills. It was small, like a single lamp, and dim, but steady. At first, I thought it was a car in the distance, maybe a truck on a side road. But then it didn't move like a car should. I slowed the car down, squinting through the windshield. "Do you see that?" I asked Jen. She leaned forward a bit, shading her eyes with her hand. "Yeah, what is that?" she said. Her voice was low, cautious. We watched it for a while, and the light didn't blink like an airplane, didn't move like a car, didn't even seem to flicker with the heat waves coming off the asphalt. It just hung there, steady, and then started moving sideways, a slow, deliberate sweep across the horizon. We both fell silent, watching it. I kept expecting it to reveal itself as something ordinary, a helicopter, a distant campsite, but it never did. An hour passed, maybe a little more. We were taking turns pointing it out, trying to convince ourselves it had to be something normal. At one point, it stopped completely, just hovered above a small rise. My chest got tight. I could feel the tension in my shoulders. Jen reached over and touched my arm. "It's not moving," she whispered. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. Then it accelerated. And I mean accelerated. Faster than any car, any plane, anything I've ever seen. It just shot up and forward, vanishing in seconds. We both blinked, our stomachs dropping. I wanted to slam on the brakes, try to follow it, but the road was straight, dark, and empty. There was nothing to track it with. Just the faint hum of our tires on the asphalt and our own breathing. We didn't speak for a few minutes after that. Jen finally broke it. Did that just happen?" she asked. I think so," I said. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting it to come back. But it didn't. The horizon was empty again, the hills dark. The stars overhead were the only other lights for miles, and suddenly the desert felt enormous and quiet. A few miles later, I slowed again. Maybe it was a satellite, I suggested, even though I didn't believe it. It hadn't moved like a satellite. It hadn't gone straight across the sky. It had hovered, and then gone, faster than anything that could exist out here. Jen laughed nervously, rubbing her arms. "Or maybe we're losing it after this drive," she said. But her voice had an edge, the kind that only comes when your brain is scrambling to make sense of something impossible. We kept driving, our speed cautious, glancing at the horizon every few minutes. For the rest of the trip, it felt like we were being watched. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see a light following us. Nothing. But there was that tension in the air again, the same thick, yet uncomfortable weight from before, like the desert had shifted around us. The next morning, after we'd stopped for breakfast in Kingman, I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept pointing out landmarks to Jen, just to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to that light, the way it had moved, hovered, then disappeared. She kept sipping her coffee, her eyes flicking to the sky, like she was waiting for something to appear. When we finally got home, life went back to normal. Work, errands, groceries. But sometimes at night, driving home from somewhere quiet or just lying in bed, I'll see that faint glow at the edge of my vision, hovering above the horizon. It never moves closer, never reveals itself, just waits there, and then, like before, it vanishes. I don't know what it was. We told a few friends, tried to rationalize it, a drone, a plane, a reflection off a hill. But nothing fits. Not the hovering, not the speed, not the way it disappeared. Jen and I haven't spoken about it much since that night. We don't need to. Both of us know what we saw. And somehow, even months later, thinking about it still makes the desert feel too wide, too empty, and me too small to understand what's out there. I keep hoping it was just an odd trick of the heat and distance. Just a reflection, just a glitch in my perception. But part of me knows it wasn't, and part of me worries we'll see it again. I'd been hiking the eastern ridge of Blackwater Mountain for hours, just trying to clear my head. It was one of those late September evenings where the sun drops fast, painting the trees gold and orange, and the air has that crisp edge that makes you glad you wore a long sleeve. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, which wasn't unusual this far out, but it made the forest feel quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. I stopped on a small outcrop, leaned against a tree, and took a sip of water. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the sunset, a glint of light bouncing off a metal patch or something on the ridge across the valley. But it didn't move like sunlight catching on branches. It hovered, suspended in the air maybe 10 feet above the ridgeline, perfectly still, reflecting the last of the sunlight back like a small mirror. I froze. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of light, a shiny rock or some sort of bird catching the angle just right, but it stayed there, just floating. I fumbled with my phone, hoping to get a picture. My fingers were cold, clumsy, and I felt like my heart was skipping. I unlocked the screen, aimed the camera at the object, and the screen froze. Just a black rectangle, completely unresponsive. I tapped, swiped, even restarted the camera app. Nothing. My phone worked fine just moments before. While I was focused on it, I noticed something else. The wind had died completely. No rustle of leaves, no creak of branches, nothing. Just an odd, unnatural silence. The birds had stopped their evening chirping too. It was like the forest had paused around that object. I tried to calm myself. It's probably a drone or a reflection or some kind of weird lens flare, I muttered out loud. But then I noticed the edges. They weren't crisp. The light bent slightly, like the object was warping the air around it. That made me take a cautious step back. My stomach had that tight, sinking feeling you get when you know you're in the middle of something that doesn't make sense. I raised my phone again, hoping it would work, but it still froze. I dropped it to my side and watched. The object didn't move horizontally, didn't shift up or down. It just hung there, reflecting everything around it. And I could swear it felt like it was watching me, though there was nothing recognizable. No shape, just light and reflection. I stepped closer to the ridge edge for a better view. My boots slipped on the loose dirt, and I gripped a tree for balance. That's when I noticed movement in the trees behind me. Or maybe it was my imagination. A flicker of shadow, too quick to pin down. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing. Just the forest, quiet again. I forced myself to look back at the ridge. The object was still there, and my phone remained frozen. I considered taking a picture with the flash on, but I didn't want to risk drawing attention if it, whatever it was aware of me. Then the object shifted. Not like it fell or moved, but it tilted. The light bent in a way that made it disappear and reappear, like it was phasing just enough that my eyes couldn't track it. My pulse spiked. I whispered my own name, like saying it aloud would somehow anchor me to reality. I backed up to a flatter section of the trail, glancing nervously at the ridge. The reflection shimmered again and vanished behind a small outcropping of rock. I squinted, trying to catch it, but it was gone. Just gone. No fading, no streaking across the sky, nothing. The forest had returned to normal. The wind was back. The birds were cautiously resuming their evening calls. My phone worked again, responsive as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, staring at the ridge. I wanted to convince myself it was a lens flare, a trick of the light, maybe a piece of shiny debris caught in the air. But the way it had disappeared, the complete vanishing, didn't feel natural. No reflection, no shadow, no trace at all. I started hiking down before it got fully dark, keeping my eyes on the ridge the whole way. Every shadow in the trees seemed like it might be moving. Every glint of sunlight caught on a branch made me flinch. I kept my phone ready, just in case, but nothing else happened. The forest stayed quiet, normal, mundane. By the time I got to my car, parked near the trailhead, the sun was gone, leaving a cold blue twilight over the parking lot. I kept checking the ridge one last time, but it was empty. Normal. I drove home slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror as if I expected to see that mirrored shape hovering behind me. I've gone back to that trail a few times since, in the daylight, in the evenings, even at dawn. Never saw anything like it again. No object, no reflection, nothing. I haven't told anyone except my sister, and I didn't push her to believe me. Even writing this now, I can still feel the weight of it. The way it hung there, perfectly still, and the way my phone froze as if the world had paused just for that moment. I don't know what it was, and I'm not even sure I want to. All I know is that for a few minutes, the ridge didn't belong to the forest, or me, or the world I know. It belonged to something else entirely. I was leaving my shift at the warehouse later than usual that night. The sky was clear, but the air had that heavy, damp feel that always comes after a week of light rain. My old Honda was humming along the two-lane back road that winds through the outskirts of Danville, and I was half listening to the radio, half worrying about whether I'd remembered to lock the front door at home. About 10 minutes in, I noticed it, a pale light hovering behind me in my rearview mirror. At first, I assumed it was another car. Headlights catching on something, but the thing wasn't moving like a car. No approach, no dimming, no shift in angle as I adjusted speed. Just there. A steady white glow about the size of a basketball in my mirror. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even adjusted the mirror, thinking maybe it was just a reflection from the dashboard or a streetlight behind me. Nothing changed. The light stayed, hovering there. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a plane? But planes make sound, and even small private planes leave those little blinking red and green navigation lights. This wasn't blinking. No sound. Just that smooth, unwavering glow. I increased my speed slightly, figuring it would either pull away or reveal itself as something normal. It stayed. I slowed down. It stayed. The more I drove, the more my stomach sank into a tight knot. It felt deliberate, like it was pacing me. About 15 minutes in, I passed a little turnoff, a patch of old gravel where I sometimes pull over if traffic is heavy or if I just need a breather. I thought about stopping there, but part of me worried that if I did, I'd have to confront whatever it was directly. So I kept driving. The orb stayed exactly the same distance behind me, always centered in the mirror. I glanced at my speedometer and headlights, tried adjusting the wipers, even though it hadn't rained in hours, just to break the pattern in my mind. Every time I thought I caught a glimpse of the road behind it, it didn't make sense. There were no trees, no roadside signs reflecting light off it, nothing that could explain how it was floating in the air like that. 20 minutes. I kept timing it in my head. My usual commute is 30 minutes from the warehouse to my apartment, but this stretch of road is usually quiet. That night, though, I couldn't hear a single car coming the other way. No trucks, no motorcycles, nothing. Only the soft hum of my engine and the occasional creak of the old tires on asphalt. I started talking to myself, quietly at first, then louder when I realized my voice was the only thing that might remind me I was alone. It's just a streetlight. It's just a streetlight, I kept repeating. But I knew it wasn't. I reached the last sharp curve before the bridge that crosses the river, a section of road where trees arch overhead and the road narrows. I decided I couldn't drive any longer with that thing behind me. My hands were gripping the wheel tight enough to leave marks. I signaled and pulled onto the gravel shoulder, heart thumping. The moment I killed the engine, the glow vanished, like it had never been there. No trail of light fading into the distance, just the dark, quiet road and the sound of my own shallow breathing. I sat for a few minutes, staring into the tree line across the road. The fog from earlier was rolling in now, thin and low over the river, turning the trees into shifting gray silhouettes. Nothing moved. No lights, no reflections, nothing. I tried to convince myself it had been headlights catching the mist, or maybe a plane that had banked out of view, but something about it had felt aware. I wasn't imagining a light. I wasn't imagining it following me. And it hadn't just disappeared because I stopped. That glow had moved with me the entire way, maintaining the same distance, the same shape, the same intensity. I finally started the car again and drove slowly over the bridge, keeping my eyes on the mirror. Nothing. Not a flicker, not a shimmer, nothing. The rest of the commute home felt normal, if tense. My usual left turn onto Maple Street seemed longer than usual. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting it to be waiting for me at the corner. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly like it always did. Quiet, dark, empty. I left the engine running a few seconds longer just to reassure myself. No light, no presence, just silence. I killed the engine, locked the doors, and sat for a moment, gripping the wheel. Inside, I flicked on every light, checked the locks again, paced a little. I even looked out the window toward the road, hoping to catch a hint of movement. Nothing. The street was still. The fog was thicker now, curling along the pavement like smoke, hiding the trees and the river behind a gray curtain. I tried to sleep that night, but I kept seeing it in my mind's eye. That glowing orb, floating steadily, following me, observing. I don't know why it stayed for 20 minutes, and I don't know why it vanished the instant I stopped. The next morning, I drove to work and kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing, just cars, the occasional jogger, and the early sun reflecting off wet pavement. I haven't seen anything like it since. Not in the city lights, not on any country roads. But sometimes when I leave work late and the fog rolls in low over the pavement, I catch a flicker in the rearview mirror that makes me hesitate, my stomach tightening. And for a moment I swear I see that pale glow hovering behind me, pacing silently, always keeping its distance. The power went out around 9 that night. We'd just finished dinner, and my wife Marcy was cleaning up in the kitchen while our daughter Emily sat on the couch flipping through her phone. Everything blinked once and then cut out. Lights, TV, fridge, all of it. The whole house dropped into silence. No hum from the appliances, no background noise. Just dark. Emily groaned immediately, thinking it was just our place, but when I stepped out onto the porch, the rest of the neighborhood was blacked out too. Every house on our street, all the way down to the highway. Dark. The only light came from the sky, a thin slice of moon and a spread of stars you don't normally notice when the street lamps are on. Marcy joined me outside, arms crossed, rubbing at her sleeves. It was early October, cool enough to see our breath. Emily followed, barefoot, carrying a candle in a glass jar like it was some kind of lantern. We sat on the porch steps, just waiting. There's not much else to do in a blackout. Usually I'd start digging around for the old radio, but something about the quiet made me stay put. The whole neighborhood felt like it had stopped breathing. No cars, no dogs barking, not even crickets, just stillness. That's when Emily said, "What's that?" She pointed out past the hills that rise up behind our town, low rounded ridges that block the view to the north. At first I didn't see anything. Then a glow rose above the tree line, 3 lights perfectly spaced in a triangle. They floated slowly up until they cleared the ridge. I thought maybe it was planes, but there was no sound. Not even the faint hum you'd expect if they were helicopters. Just silent, bright orbs, each about the size of a star if you held your hand out, but closer, sharper. They moved together, steady, keeping that triangular shape as they drifted above the hills. Marcy whispered, "Drones?" But it didn't feel right. No blinking red or green nav lights, no buzzing, nothing man-made about the way they hung there. We all sat frozen, watching. The lights glided forward, then paused. A long pause, maybe a full minute where they didn't move at all. Then one of them slid sideways, slow and deliberate, breaking formation. It drifted maybe 50 yards away from the others, held there for a moment, then zipped back into place so fast my eyes barely followed it. Emily gasped out loud. The other 2 followed suit, one darting forward, the other shooting straight up before snapping back down. Each time they returned to that perfect triangle like magnets snapping into place. No noise, no trail, just movement too clean to make sense. We sat there, barely breathing, watching them repeat this strange dance. Separating, darting in random directions, then reforming instantly. The triangle never wavered, never tilted. Always equilateral, and no matter how far one strayed before returning. At one point, all 3 drifted closer, hovering maybe half a mile from where we sat. Close enough that the light from them cast a faint glow over the ridge, bright enough to outline the tops of the trees. It wasn't a beam, not like a spotlight. More like the air itself was lit up around them. Marcy reached over and grabbed my hand. Hard. She didn't say anything. The lights stayed there, unmoving for what felt like forever. Then, without warning, they shot upward in unison, climbing fast, not a curve, not an arc, straight up. They went so high so quickly that they looked like stars again, lost in the sky. Then they just blinked out, all at once. Gone. The 3 of us sat there, staring at the empty sky. The power in the neighborhood stayed off another hour, but none of us went back inside. We just stayed on the porch, waiting to see if they'd come back. They didn't. I started up the trail just after 6 in the morning. The sun was technically up, but you wouldn't know it by looking. Everything was buried in fog. I'd parked at the little gravel lot at the base of Raven Hollow, a place I'd hiked dozens of times. It's not a hard trail, maybe 5 miles round trip, but the elevation gain is decent. I like going early before anyone else is out, mostly because it feels like the whole forest is mine. That morning was colder than I expected for late May. The fog sat heavy, rolling in thick waves, dampening everything. The usual forest sounds were muted. No bird song, no chipmunks skittering across logs. Just my boots on the dirt and the occasional drip of water falling from branches. About half a mile in, I noticed something strange. A sound. At first, I thought it was just a woodpecker. It was a faint tapping, spaced out at regular intervals. Metallic, not the hollow, uneven rhythm of beak on bark. This was sharper, almost like someone hitting a pipe with a hammer. Slow and steady. I stopped walking and listened. Tap. Pause. Tap. Each one echoed through the fog, carrying farther than I could tell. It didn't seem like it came from one direction. It was just around me. I stood still for a minute, expecting it to fade. Instead, it kept on. Same rhythm, same tone. Tap. Tap. I thought maybe there were surveyors out there, or some maintenance crew working on a tower. But Raven Hollow doesn't have any infrastructure. No power lines, no cell towers. Nothing but trail markers nailed to the occasional tree. I kept going, trying not to overthink it. The fog was thick enough that I could only see maybe 30 feet ahead. Every so often I'd stop and listen. The tapping was still there, following me, never closer, never farther. About 2 miles in, the trail curved toward a ridge that overlooks the valley. Usually on a clear day, you can see all the way down to the river cutting through the bottom. That morning, I couldn't see 10 feet past the drop. The fog was even thicker along the ridge, swirling and rising like smoke. I sat on a flat rock to catch my breath. The tapping grew louder there, but it didn't change its rhythm. Same steady beat. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. I told myself it had to be construction noise drifting in from somewhere I couldn't see. Except there are no roads on that side of the valley. Then, for the first time all morning, the fog thinned. It didn't clear completely, just pulled back enough to show the outline of the valley. I looked out, expecting maybe to glimpse the river. What I saw instead was a shape hanging in the air. It was silver, dull and smooth like brushed steel. Hard to gauge the size from that distance, but it looked big, bigger than a house. It hung completely motionless above the valley, maybe 100 feet above the treetops. No sound, no movement, just there. The tapping stopped the second I saw it. I froze, gripping the edge of the rock, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. I thought it had to be a trick of the light, maybe some weird play of fog and sun, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was solid. The fog drifted around it, breaking against its edges. It wasn't shaped like anything familiar. Not a plane, not a helicopter. No wings, no rotors, no tail. Just an oval, perfectly smooth. The fog shifted again, thicker this time, and the object vanished behind it, like someone had pulled a curtain across the valley. The tapping started up again. That was the moment I stood up and decided to turn back. My heart was pounding in my chest, my legs shaky. I didn't run, but I walked fast, keeping my eyes down on the trail. Every few seconds I'd hear that metallic sound, keeping pace with me. Tap, tap, tap. Half a mile from the trailhead, I passed the first other person I'd seen all morning, a woman in a red windbreaker, heading up. She nodded at me. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I just nodded back and kept walking. By the time I reached my car, the fog was thinning out. The tapping had faded. I stood there with the hatch open, staring back at the trail, trying to hear it again. Nothing. Just birdsong, like the forest had woken up all at once. Driving home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel. All I could think about was that silver shape, motionless above the valley, and the way the sound had stopped the second I saw it. It was late August, the middle of tuna season, and I'd taken the boat out farther than usual. I fish alone most of the time, partly because I don't mind the quiet, partly because nobody else I know wants to sit on open water for 12 hours chasing maybe one good catch. My boat's a 20-foot center console, nothing fancy, but it's sturdy and gets me where I need to go. That morning I launched out of Gloucester around 4:30 a.m. By 7 the sun was up, bright but hazy, and I was about 20 miles offshore. The water was calmer than expected. Swells were low, no real wind to speak of, just that steady hum of the outboard and the smell of diesel mixed with salt. I set up a drift line and sat back with a thermos of coffee, scanning the water. The horizon looked endless, like it always does that far out. No other boats in sight. Not unusual, though. It was a weekday. Around 9, I noticed something odd on the surface about 50 yards off the port side. At first I thought it was just a patch of kelp or debris, but it was too bright. The water there looked lit from underneath, glowing faintly. My first thought was sunlight hitting a shoal of fish, reflecting weirdly. I stood up for a better look. The glow wasn't shimmering or shifting like fish would. It was steady, circular, maybe 20 feet across. The longer I stared, the more it looked like the light wasn't reflecting. It was coming from beneath the surface. The boat rocked gently. I glanced around again, expecting to spot another vessel. Nothing. Just blue water in every direction. I grabbed my binoculars from the console and steadied them. Through the lenses, the glow was sharper. Not diffused like sunlight, but solid, concentrated. I lowered the binoculars and squinted with my bare eyes. Still there. I should have moved the boat closer, but something about it made me hesitate. Instead, I killed the motor and just listened. The usual sounds were there. Slap of water on the hull, a gull somewhere overhead, the creak of a rod holder. But under that, faintly, I thought I could hear a low vibration. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure in my chest. The light shifted. It didn't flicker or fade, it moved. Slowly it drifted closer, the glow expanding as it came. My heart started hammering. I stepped back from the gunwale, half expecting something huge to break the surface. Then, without warning, the light surged upward. Water erupted, spraying across the deck as something burst out. It wasn't an object I could define, just a sphere of blinding white light about the size of a car, rising straight up. It cleared the surface in silence, not a splash or roar, just a clean break like the sea let it through. Droplets rained down, hissing against the deck where they hit. The light hovered maybe 30 feet above the boat. I shielded my eyes with one hand, staring up. No sound, no heat, just a steady glow that made every shadow on the deck stretch sharp and long. I don't know how long it stayed there. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been a full minute. My mind was scrambling between trying to memorize every detail and trying not to panic. Then, as smoothly as it had risen, it shot upward. Not fast like a flare or a plane. Instant. One moment it was hovering over the boat, the next it was a pinprick high in the sky, vanishing against the glare of the sun. I stood there gripping the rail, breathing hard, waiting for something else to happen. The water around the boat was still rippling from the burst, concentric circles spreading out. The vibration in my chest was gone. Everything was normal again. The rods were still in their holders, cooler still closed. Coffee thermos tipped over where I'd dropped it. Just a calm sea stretching out in every direction. I stayed anchored for another hour, not fishing, just sitting there staring at the water. I couldn't bring myself to start the motor right away. It felt like if I did, that light might come back. When I finally turned the key, the engine coughed like usual and rumbled to life. Nothing strange about it. I set a course back toward shore, checking the horizon every few seconds, half expecting to see that glow again. About 10 miles out, I passed another boat heading east. A guy in a red cap waved at me. I almost flagged him down, almost asked if he'd seen anything out there, but I didn't. I just nodded and kept going. By the time I reached the harbor, the whole thing felt like it could have been a hallucination, except the deck was still wet in places it shouldn't have been, and my shirt was damp from the spray. The coffee thermos was still lying on its side where I dropped it. That night, when I tried to sleep, I kept seeing that sphere hanging silently over the boat, shadows stretching long across the deck, everything frozen in that strange, steady glow. I woke up because the dog was whining. Molly sleeps in a crate at the foot of the bed, and she's usually silent through the night. At first I thought she just needed to go out, but then I noticed the glow coming through the curtains. It wasn't steady. The backyard floodlight was flicking on and off. I lay there for a second listening. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just that sharp click of the sensor tripping, then dark, then bright again. Over and over. At first it seemed random, but after the third or fourth cycle I realized it was keeping a rhythm. On for about 2 seconds, off for 2. Almost like a metronome. Molly gave a low growl. Not her usual bark. More of a rumble, like she was afraid. I got out of bed, slipped on my hoodie, and pulled the curtain back. The floodlight shone straight across the yard, white and harsh, then cut out, leaving the grass in black shadow, then back on. Every blade of grass lit up in detail, then vanished again. I figured it was the sensor going bad, though it had never done that before. But when it clicked on for the 5th time, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The beam lit up the roofline of the detached garage at the back of the yard, and above it, just barely visible, was a darker shape against the night sky. It wasn't clouds. The sky was clear, stars scattered everywhere. This thing was faint, but had edges, a kind of wide oval outline. It didn't move, not even a little. The stars around it looked warped, like when you see heat waves rising off pavement. I froze at the window, trying to make sense of it. The floodlight kept its steady pulse. 2 seconds bright, 2 seconds dark. Each time it lit up, I caught the same glimpse of that shape hovering above the garage, not high up, just barely clearing the roofline. Molly whined louder, pawing at the crate door. I hushed her without looking away. I didn't want to blink. Finally, I slipped into my slippers, grabbed the old mag light from the dresser, and stepped into the hall. I told myself I'd just look from the back door. No need to go outside. The house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat said 70. My feet were sweating inside the slippers, but my arms had goosebumps. When I reached the kitchen, the floodlight was still flashing, steady as ever. I unlocked the sliding glass door and leaned close without opening it. The glass fogged a little with my breath. From there, I could see more of the yard, the oak tree swaying slightly in the night air, though the branches only moved during the dark intervals. When the light came on, the tree looked frozen, not a twitch. That's when I noticed the hum. It was faint at first, like standing near power lines, just a low vibration in the air. Each time the floodlight clicked on, the hum cut out. Each time it went dark, the hum came back. In rhythm, perfect. I stood there way too long just staring, waiting for it to change, but it didn't. The shape above the garage stayed fixed. The stars seemed bent around it, and the cycle continued. Finally, I slid the door open a crack. The night air rushed in, cold and damp. Molly barked then, sharp and panicked, which she never does in the house. I almost shut the door again, but something made me step out onto the patio. The hum hit me harder outside, not louder exactly, but stronger, like it was pressing against my chest. The grass glowed white, then black, white, then black. My own shadow kept appearing and vanishing, jerking like a puppet. I swung the maglite up toward the garage roof. The beam cut across shingles, then hit the sky above, and stopped. It was like it struck something solid. The light didn't pass through, it just flattened against empty air. I tilted the beam left and right, and it traced an outline, huge and smooth, bigger than the garage itself. Oval, or maybe circular, hard to tell. The second I did that, the floodlight stopped pulsing. It just stayed on, steady and bright, like nothing had happened. The hum cut out completely. For a moment, the yard looked normal again. The oak tree swayed gently. Molly's shadow stretched across the grass, and the stars overhead were sharp and clear. But when I lowered the flashlight, the shape was still there. Fainter now, harder to see, but it's still blotting out a patch of stars above the garage. It hovered for maybe 10 more seconds, then it shifted. No sound, no wind, just a smooth slide to the right, clearing the garage roofline. I craned my neck, following it, heart pounding in my throat. It drifted past the tree, then over the far fence line. The stars bent around it, then it was gone. The floodlights stayed on the rest of the night. I couldn't get Molly to go out to the bathroom until morning. She planted her paws and wouldn't budge. I sat at the kitchen table with the maglite in my lap, staring out the glass door until the sun came up. Nothing else happened, but I kept expecting that light to start pulsing again, the hum to roll back through the yard. By daylight, the garage looked ordinary, shingles catching the sun, oak tree full of birds. The floodlight clicked off with the timer like it always does. I walked out there with Molly trailing behind me, sniffing the ground, ears down. I checked every corner of the garage roof, ran my hand along the shingles, even climbed the ladder to the top. Nothing. No marks, no wires, no scorch, nothing at all. But standing up there, looking at where that shape had been, I had the strangest sense it wasn't gone, just higher or farther or waiting. I climbed down quick and didn't linger. That was 3 nights ago. The floodlight hasn't flickered since. Molly still won't go out after dark unless I'm right there with her. We set up camp late in the afternoon on the north side of Lake Ojima. It wasn't a big trip, just a quick weekend away. My girlfriend Hannah had found this little campground online. Basic sites, fire pits, not much else. The weather was decent for early September. Cool, cloudy, no bugs. The lake was calm when we got there, a smooth sheet of gray water with the trees reflecting off it. Only 2 other sites were taken, both farther down the shore, so it felt like we had the place to ourselves. We pitched the tent, got a fire going, and cooked sausages on a little cast iron pan. It was quiet. No boats, no music from the other campers, just the crackle of the fire and the occasional splash from a fish jumping. I remember Hannah saying how she liked the stillness, how it felt more like the kind of camping her dad used to take her on when she was a kid. By the time it was dark, the clouds had thickened. No moon, no stars, just a dull sky. The only light came from the fire and the lantern we'd set on the picnic table. We sat on the logs near the waterline, talking, wrapped in jackets. Around 10, that's when it started. At first, I thought it was just my ears ringing, a low vibration, like when you've been to a loud concert. But it didn't fade. It stayed steady. Then I noticed the lantern on the table rattling slightly. Hannah asked if I heard it too, and when I nodded, we both just sat there listening. It was a hum, very low, almost below hearing, but strong enough you could feel it in your chest. The lake reacted before we did. Out near the middle, the water rippled in a way that didn't make sense. Perfect circles spread outward like raindrops. Except there was nothing falling. The air was dry. No wind, nothing hitting the surface. We both stood, staring. The circles multiplied, overlapping in strange patterns, but all of them were too neat, too even. Hannah whispered, "That's not right," and I didn't have an answer. I crouched closer to the edge and shined my flashlight out, trying to catch whatever was causing it, but the beam showed nothing. Just water, rings spreading out over and over. The humming deepened. It wasn't loud, exactly, but it carried through everything. Through the ground, through the water, through my ribs. I remember pressing a hand against the dirt and feeling it buzz faintly, like the whole lake bed was trembling. We stood there for a long time, not talking. At one point, Hannah grabbed my sleeve and pointed upward. Through the clouds, just barely, there was a glow. Not bright, not sharp, just a patch of sky lighter than the rest, directly over the lake. It moved slowly, sliding from one side to the other, the hum rising and dipping with it. I thought maybe it was a plane at first, but it was too still, too wide. And the light wasn't blinking like any aircraft I've seen. It was diffuse, like a lantern behind fog. When the glow reached the center of the lake, the ripples stopped all at once. The surface went completely flat, like glass. The humming cut out too, so sudden it made my ears ring again. For a second, there was total silence. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Then the glow faded back into the clouds, and the lake looked normal again. Just dark water, no ripples, no movement. Hannah asked me if we should pack up, but neither of us moved. We just stood by the shore, waiting for something else to happen. After maybe 10 minutes, when nothing returned, we finally sat down by the fire. Neither of us wanted to admit how unnerved we were, but it hung between us. I remember glancing at the water over and over, expecting the rings to start again. We stayed up later than planned, watching until the fire burned low. The humming never came back. The glow didn't either. But the feeling of the ground buzzing under my palm, that stayed in my head the rest of the night. In the tent, Hannah kept the lantern on until we both finally drifted off. Every time I woke up, I listened for that sound, bracing for it to start again. It never did. The lake was quiet in the morning, like nothing had ever happened. I left my brother's place outside of Jackson around 11:30 that night. It was one of those visits where we just kept talking, and before I knew it, I was looking at my watch and realizing I had a long drive back to my place in Brownsville ahead of me. It had been raining earlier in the evening, but by the time I got on the road, the sky had cleared. The pavement was still damp though, shining under my headlights, and the fields on either side of the highway were covered in patches of mist that sat low, like they were clinging to the grass. It was a 2-lane highway, barely any traffic at that hour. I didn't see another set of headlights in front of me or behind me for the first 20 minutes. Just me, the hum of my tires, and the occasional chorus of crickets when I rolled down the window a crack. That's probably why I noticed the star in the first place. It caught my eye because it was brighter than everything else in the sky. Not in a dazzling way, just steady, more solid somehow. I figured it was a planet at first, maybe Venus, but it was low, almost too low. It sat right above the tree line to my left, just above the dark silhouette of oaks and pines. A few minutes later, I glanced over again. It was still there, same spot. I drove another mile, then another. The thing didn't move in relation to the trees. I started paying closer attention. My car was going a steady 60, winding along the curves of that highway, and the star seemed to be keeping pace with me, always the same distance above the horizon. At first, I told myself it was just perspective. Sometimes when you're driving, the moon or a bright star looks like it's following you. But this wasn't the moon, and it wasn't drifting through the sky behind scattered clouds. It stayed perfectly aligned with the tree line, almost like it was riding just above it. I tested it a little. When the road curved right, the light adjusted. When I sped up, it seemed to match. It didn't drift behind or ahead. It stayed locked to my position, just a faint, pale glow about the size of a dime held at arm's length. I rolled my window all the way down and leaned to look at it without the glass in between. No sound, no pulsing, just steady. My chest felt tight, and I caught myself gripping the wheel too hard. I thought about pulling over, but the idea of sitting still on a dark highway while that thing hovered nearby made my stomach turn. About 10 miles out from Stanton, the road cut through a wide open stretch with soybean fields on both sides. No trees to break the horizon. That's when I realized the light wasn't fixed in the sky. It actually descended slightly to keep the same distance above the land. As the tree line dipped down, the star dipped with it, staying low instead of hanging up with the rest of the night sky. By then, I couldn't pretend it was just a star. I kept flicking my eyes from the road to the glow, half expecting it to veer off, but it never did. I turned off the radio and cracked the window wider, trying to hear something, anything. But there was nothing except the drone of my engine and the wet hiss of tires on pavement. At one point, a set of headlights appeared behind me in the rearview mirror. I felt a wave of relief, like maybe I could flag them down if things got worse. But when I glanced back to the side, the light was still there. The car behind me must not have noticed, or maybe they didn't care. After about 5 minutes, their headlights faded away at a turnoff, and I was alone again. I thought about calling someone, my brother maybe, but the idea of trying to explain it while driving made me feel ridiculous. Plus, I didn't want to take my eyes off the road long enough to fish for my phone, so I just kept driving, watching the glow pace me mile after mile. Somewhere between Stanton and Brownsville, the highway runs alongside a stretch of forest where the trees grow close to the road. For a few minutes, the branches blocked my view. I thought maybe it would be gone when the trees opened up again. But no, the moment the canopy broke, there it was, sliding along at the same speed, same height, like nothing had changed. I don't know how long it lasted in total, maybe 40 minutes, maybe more. The longer it went on, the less it felt like a coincidence. My chest was tight the whole time, and my mouth had gone dry. I tried not to think about how empty the highway was or how far I was from the nearest house. Then, just as I came over a slight rise in the road, it blinked out. Not like it flew away, not like it dimmed. It was just there 1 second, gone the next. The trees stretched for miles in every direction, and the sky was perfectly clear. I scanned the horizon, craned my neck to look up through the windshield, but there was nothing but stars. I kept waiting for it to reappear, for it to slide back into place, but the rest of the drive home was normal. My house felt strangely bright when I finally pulled into the driveway, like stepping in from a storm even though the air was still. I let Toby out of the back seat, carried my things inside, and sat for a long time in the kitchen without turning on the TV or music. I tried to tell myself it was some trick of perspective, or maybe even a plane at just the right angle. But I've seen plenty of planes at night, and none of them pace a car along a rural highway for nearly an hour. It wasn't a star. It wasn't the moon. It moved when I moved, and then it was gone. I was out checking my cattle that night because one of the heifers had been acting off earlier in the day. She'd been pacing along the fence line, head swinging around like she was spooked by something I couldn't see. I figured coyotes. That's usually the answer out here. We get them nosing around from time to time, though I'd never lost one of mine to them. Still, it was enough to make me drive back out after dark. It was around 10:30 when I headed out. The moon was only a sliver, not giving off much light. The sky was clear though, stars spread thick overhead, no wind, no bugs buzzing. That kind of quiet that almost feels heavy. I had my old mag light in one hand and the 22 in the other, just in case. The pasture stretched wide on the north side of the house, maybe 50 acres, sloping down toward a line of low hills. When I came over the first rise, I knew something was wrong. The herd wasn't spread out like usual. They were all bunched up tight in the lower field, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Cows don't do that unless there's weather or a predator, and the night was calm. The weirdest part was the way they were standing. Every single head was pointed in the same direction toward the hills. I slowed down, shining my light across them. Their eyes glowed back in the beam, hundreds of little yellow-green reflections. Not one of them blinked or turned when I passed the light over. They just stared. I followed their line of sight. At first, I didn't notice anything. Then, after a few seconds, I saw it, a faint blue glow pulsing just behind the hills. It wasn't bright, more like the dim light you see from a town over the horizon, except there's no town out there. Just scrub, rock, and more pasture. The glow faded in and out, steady as a heartbeat. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off. I stood there counting, realizing it was perfectly timed. I've lived out here my whole life, and I've never seen anything in those hills that gives off light like that. I tried to tell myself it was someone messing around with a generator or a piece of equipment, maybe a hunter camping with a lantern, but that didn't explain why the cattle were so dead set on it. I whistled low, trying to break them up, but none of them moved. A couple twitched their ears, that was it. After a minute or two, I started walking closer. I didn't want to, but standing still felt worse. The ground was dry and cracked under my boots, crunching with every step. The farther I got from the house, the more wrong it all felt. My own shadow from the flashlight stretched way ahead of me, long and thin, waving over the grass. When I hit the fence line, I stopped again. The glow was stronger there, spilling faintly over the ridge. Every pulse lit up the outline of the rocks and mesquite on top. I swear the air seemed to thrum with it, like a low vibration you felt more than heard. I waited, trying to pick out movement or sound. Nothing, just that glow, fading in and out, too regular to be fire, too soft to be headlights. Behind me, the cattle let out a low, rolling moan all at once. Not panicked, not loud, just this strange unified sound that went on for maybe 5 seconds. It was enough to raise the hair on my arms. They'd never done that before. I climbed over the fence. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to get closer, just enough to see what was making that light. The grass on the other side was taller, brushing against my jeans as I moved. My flashlight beam looked weak compared to the pulses ahead, like it couldn't quite cut through the dark. Halfway up the rise, my light flickered. Just once, a little hiccup. I smacked it, and it came back strong. Then, about 10 steps later, it cut out completely. Dead. I shook it, twisted the cap, nothing. The batteries had been new that morning. That was when I noticed the stars above me looked different. Not gone, not dim, just off. The ones over the hills seemed to blur when the glow pulsed like they wavered in water. I rubbed my eyes thinking it was me, but it stayed the same. I crouched low, heart going hard now. Every instinct I had told me not to crest that hill. I thought about how no sound was coming from there. Not a generator, not voices, not even wind moving through the brush. Just silence and that blue heartbeat of light. I sat there for a long while, trying to work up the nerve. My watch said it was 11:17. When I looked again, what felt like a couple minutes later, it was 11:39. I don't remember losing track of time. I didn't zone out. I was alert, staring straight ahead the whole time, and somehow 20 minutes were gone. The glow was still pulsing, steady as ever. I couldn't take it anymore. I backed down the hill, slow at first, then faster once the fence came into sight. The second my boots hit the other side, the cattle shifted. They spread just a little, like whatever tension held them broke. I turned back to the hills one last time. The glow faded, slow and smooth, until the ridge was dark again. My flashlight came back on in my hand without me touching it. Just flared to life like nothing had happened. I didn't climb that fence again. I herded the cattle back toward the barn, which they followed without a fuss this time, and I stayed out there until after midnight, just leaning on the gate and staring at the ridge. Nothing else showed. The stars looked normal again. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table with the gun still in my hand. Out the window, the hills were just shadows in the distance. Quiet, ordinary, like nothing had ever happened at all. It started with the knocking. We were crouched over the little camp stove, trying to keep our coffee warm without filling the tent with soot, when I heard it. 3 soft knocks, spaced out, like someone tapping a spoon against a hollow log. I looked up before I could tell Ben, because I figured he'd blame the raccoons or the cooling metal on the kettle. The knocks came again, the same cadence, and this time Laura, who was leaning back against her pack, froze with her mug halfway to her mouth. "Did you hear that?" she asked, voice low. We both did. The sound was close, like it was a few trees in, maybe 20, 30 feet away. The woods around our campsite were quiet in a way that made the knocks stand out. No crickets, no distant road noise, nothing rustling in the leaves. The air had that damp, piney smell you get after a late summer shower, and our flashes of breathing felt loud. I told myself it was a branch knocking against another branch or a deer moving through the understory. Ben said, probably owls, but his voice didn't have the usual edge of certainty. We were about 10 miles off the last gravel road, at a site called Hemlock Hollow, because of the stand of small hemlocks that ringed the clearing. We'd chosen it because it was well away from other groups and gave us that alone-in-the-woods feeling we came out here for. The sun had dropped behind the ridge earlier. It was the kind of blue twilight where the trees turn to shapes and the sense of distance gets weird. Our headlamps were on low, a dim band around the opening of the tent. The knocks came again, but now they were not random. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3. Even my heart started matching it, slow and careful, because the forest itself had gone very still. We stood up like a unit. Ben grabbed his flashlight and I clipped my knife onto my belt. Laura zipped her mug back into the vestibule and slid into her jacket. "Come on," she said. "Let's have a look." We shouldn't have gone all together. In hindsight, I know that groups on trails were always a bad idea for being bold. But the woods felt almost friendly during the day, and the knocking had this strange, harmless rhythm to it that made us think a human was nearby. We left the campsite in a small clump, headlamps cutting 2 narrow cones into the dark. The knocking stopped the second we stepped out of the clearing. We moved toward the sound, careful on the wet leaves and the roots. My phone said no bars, which was normal there, and the little compass app spun for a second before settling. I remember that because it felt wrong, like the forest had just put a hand over the signal. We passed a fallen spruce with ferns growing on it and then came to a stand of 3 trunks, close and almost fused at the base. The knocks had definitely come from this general area, but there was nothing. No boot prints, no drop tool, no flashlight beam from anyone. Ben crouched and ran his fingers in the loam. "No prints," he said. "Nothing that looks recent." Laura walked a slow semicircle, headlamp bobbing, and then pointed. "Over there," she said, toward a small gap between the trunks where moonlight bled in from the clearing. I peered into the space and saw nothing but the black hollow between roots and damp leaves. For a moment, I thought I saw the shadow of a squirrel, but it was gone the second I blinked. We stood there for a while. The knocking did not return. The silence grew thick enough you could press it between your palms. We joked because people always joke to get through the weird, but my hands were sweating. The joke was that the hollow had its own mailbox system, and someone was delivering late-night mail. By the time we slipped back to the tent, it was nearly dark. The canopy had closed, and the sky was a strip of cloud and light beyond the treetops. We lit the stove again, made coffee, and kept our voices low. Every little sound, zipper, mug clink, the stove click, felt conspicuous. We debated leaving, going back to the car and driving to a motel, but it felt like a coward's move. We'd been backpacking together for years, and part of the deal was staying put and poking at the edges of things, not running at the first odd noise. The knocks came again after an hour, though this time they were farther out, softer, and more irregular. 1, 2, pause. one. I told myself it was nothing. Laura kept staring toward the trees. Ben finally said quietly, "Okay, next time we hear it, we go look together. And we bring flashlights." We did. We crept out as a trio in our headlamps. The light from our lamps made the trunks look like theater columns. The knocks fell, spaced thin, and we moved toward them. They stopped as soon as we slowed. When we pushed off the trail into the understory, it felt like walking into a different temperature, chillier air settling under the branches. My jacket was not sufficient. I felt the cold in my knuckles. Then the light showed up. It was pale, close to white, but with a softness to it that made it hard to say whether it was cold or warm light. It drifted between trunks maybe 50 feet from us, about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. It wasn't a point so much as a small oval, like a soap bubble with a dim internal glow. It moved almost lazily, weaving between trees as if it were following a current generated deeper in the wood. When it appeared, the knocking stopped mid-pattern. The last few taps hung in the air like a phrase cut off in the middle. We watched it without breathing because the way it moved made breathing feel like interference. My headlamp haloed the trunks and cones, and the light was just there between them, more solid than a reflection, more like a small lamp someone had set down then forgotten. Laura whispered, "Is that a lantern?" And I could tell by the way she said it that she didn't believe it was. There were no glints of metal, no shadow of a person holding anything, no noise of a generator or soft conversation. The forest really was silent, aside from the distant creek. I raised my flashlight. The beam crossed the pale glow, and the glow did not twitch. It didn't scatter the way mist would, nor did it throw a shadow on the trunks. When I tried my phone camera, it lagged and then froze, a black frame where the glow should have been. I tapped the screen and it flicked back, but the camera app showed only the trees, not the light. My hands were steady and my fingers moved, but the screen wouldn't capture the thing in front of us. We stepped closer. The glow drifted away a little, like it was encouraging us to follow. For a second, I would have sworn I heard something like a far-off chime, the tiniest tinkle of glass, but it may have been nothing at all. The closest we got, the more it felt like looking at something through a pane of mist. The outline was soft, and the center seemed to pulse just a touch, though it did not brighten or change color. Ben tried to make a joke about ghosts with headlamps, and we laughed because the laughter made our throats less tight. Laura moved a little to the left, and the light moved, keeping a modest distance. It felt aware of us, as if some animal studying a new presence would be. Not hostile. No hair on the back of my neck stood up, but attentive, and that made it more unnerving. We followed it between trunks in single file for maybe 30 feet. Every time we slowed, the knocks started again, farther off in the dark, like an answering pattern, one knocking where there had been none a minute before. The timing of everything layered up, the knocks, the drift of the light, the way the forest seemed to be listening. I had a steady, wrong thought that we were being observed from several places at once. Then it did something I didn't like at all. It paused right at the edge of the clearing where the last of the evening light leaked through the trees. A shape, the small, close thing, hung there, and for a fraction of a second it seemed to level with the stars that were beginning to show overhead. The top of it blurred into the night like a smudge on glass. It moved away, slowly, and we didn't follow. We turned back to the tent. Our boots made more noise on the damp trail than I expected. When we unzipped the vestibule, the tent felt small and ordinary and perfectly safe. We sat down and made ourselves eat the cold hot dogs we'd tucked into our packs, and it was ridiculous. The way we pretended normal was a thing that could be picked up and put back where we found it. Our hands shook with coffee, and the sound of our mugs seemed very loud in the quiet. I wrestled with sleep and the not sleep that comes from being too alert. Occasional knocks came through the night, sometimes directly at the edge of the clearing, other times even farther, always spaced in that slow 3-beat rhythm. Once I swore I heard something run through the leaves, like someone in parka pants skirting the campsite, but when I unzipped and shone my headlamp, there was nothing, only the glow faintly drifting between trees beyond our ring of sleeping bags. In the morning, the light was gone like something that had never been there. The ground between the trees was soft and unmarked, no footprints, no trampled ferns, nothing that showed where the light had danced. The knocks had stopped. The forest was full of birdsong and a normal, ordinary kind of noise. And the first coffee tasted like the first coffee you have after a bad night. Better than you feared, but everyone at the table too tired to be funny. We tore down camp faster than we usually did. Pieces of the night kept replaying for me as we packed, how the phone camera had blanked, how the knocks matched our steps sometimes, how the light moved without wind. Laura said maybe we'll read about lantern festivals, and Ben said or someone's new lantern tech. And I said nothing because I didn't have an answer that fit. On the drive home, the road curved through hills, and the radio cut in and out in patches. My signal flickered to life, just long enough for us to get one bar of reception and a weather advisory for thunderstorms out by the coast. The rest of the day, we circled the topic like a subject at a dinner party you don't want to be the only one to bring up. We all admitted later that we'd been afraid at different points, not the kind of jump and run fear, but that slow, aware fear that makes you move carefully and count. Back at the house, I washed my boots and hung them on the porch rail. The ordinary tactile things helped: soap suds, stiff laces, the smell of campfire lingering on jeans. I kept checking my phone, more out of habit than hope, flipping through the shots we'd taken earlier. Trees, our messy campsite, Laura with her hair in a knot, no pale light, no frozen frames. I've told a couple of friends in offhand ways how we chased a light between trees and heard knocks in the dark. They smiled and said predictable things. Ghost stories and lanterns, signal interference, a trick of a wet night. Maybe they're right. Maybe we were tired, or the combination of damp cold and expectation made the world conspire to be strange. But I remember the rhythm of the knocks, the way the light held its space between trunks and refused the beam of my flashlight, and the phone camera that simply would not show what my eyes had. Sometimes, when my sleep runs thin and I hear a tapping in the apartment, someone on the stairs, a package on the porch, I look up and hold my breath, waiting for a pale oval to drift by the window. It never does. We made it home without anything following, no scratches, nothing to show except the memory of the night. The woods folded back into the ordinary day in front of us. The knocking has never come again, and the pale light has not drifted past any of my windows since. But every so often, when the evening is the kind where the trees hold their breath, I find myself listening, just in case the rhythm returns. It was a little after 2 when the shadow crossed the pumps. I noticed it because the big overhead canopy light was on the fritz, one of those old sodium bulbs that hummed and gave the lot a sickly yellow. I was behind the counter, scraping a half-frozen donut into the trash and topping off the coffee drip, when something passed under that light and made the air look wrong for a second. Not a person. Too long and thin, like a curtain of dark sliding between islands. It moved slow, deliberate from pump 3 toward pump 6, and when it went past the gray SUV that was idling with its engine off, the driver didn't flinch. He was staring down at his phone like everyone does, completely oblivious. I chalked it up to sleep-deprived eyes. Night shifts do that. But then the security monitor flickered. We've got 4 cameras on the canopy, part of a system the owner installed when someone took a jackhammer to the beer cooler a couple years back. The screen in the office goes to a grid and shows all 4 feeds. And for a beat, the camera over pump 4 showed static. Then the static swept like snow only in the lower left corner, and then the picture was back. I looked up and the shadow was gone, like somebody had pulled a curtain shut. A woman came in. I remember the jingling of the door because I always listen for it. Asked for a lotto ticket. She smelled like cigarettes and winter. The sleeve of her coat had frost on it, even though it wasn't that cold. She paid with exact change, and her hands never trembled. She glanced at the pumps on her way to the register and said, "Weird out there, huh?" And I nodded. I wanted to tell her the shadow had just crossed the island, but it sounded stupid as soon as it left my mouth. She left, the bell tinkling, and the lot looked ordinary again. The SUV idling, a couple of empty carts, a crumpled receipt on the ground. I went through the usual motions. Sweep, bag, restock the cigarettes, check the beer cooler, write down the delivery times on the clipboard. The little things you do on the second shift to keep from going hollow-eyed. The radio over the deli counter was playing a late-night talk show that's more us than music. Callers with weird stories, farmers phoning in about coyotes. But the signal cut like it does when my phone loses a bar. A thin strip of static, and then the host's voice came back as if nothing happened. Then the overhead light over pump 5 dinged and dropped to half voltage, this slow dimmer effect that made the shadow of the pump handle look wide like a hand. The hum from the light made my molars ache. When I looked at the CCTV again, one of the cameras showed the parking area empty and the image folded in on itself in a corner, like a smear of time where nothing had been recorded. It made me feel like the night had a scene. A pickup rolled up at pump 2 and the driver stayed in it, headlights on, window down by a hair. He kept glancing at the tree line past the lot. Once he opened his door and listened, then shut it, then leaned on the horn for a second just to break the quiet. The horn sounded thin, far away. He came in and asked for smokes and nothing else, paid, and left without looking at us again. Later, I checked the timestamp on the receipt, 2:09 a.m. He'd been at the pump for 3 minutes. I remember that detail because the exact minutes kept ticking at me like a clock everyone else ignored. Something else happened that I didn't like. The pharmacy across the street that had those bright channel letters, the letters that glow white and make your skin look a different color, flickered in sync with the canopy light. One moment the sign was steady, the next it blinked out for a second, then came back on. The whole block went dim the tiniest fraction of a degree, just long enough for the shadows to feel pushed a shade deeper. Then the moving silhouette returned. This time it started at the corner of my vision, down the aisle by the slushy machine, and it slid right across the painted striping toward pump 7. It was bigger now, or maybe I was closer to it in my head. It moved without sound. I stood up from the counter, forgetting the half-wiped pastry I was supposed to toss, and walked to the front glass because that's what you do. You go look, even though you know people look and don't see the same thing. When I peered through the window, it would have been ridiculous to say there was anything there. Headlights made lines on the pavement, the street lamp over the corner threw its cone, and the SUV was still idling. But when I looked in the direction the shadow had slid through, the lot felt like a stage after a prop has been dragged off. The color was wrong, as if a film of gray had been wiped across the night. For an instant, my vision caught the movement at the edge, like the corner of the world riffling. I blinked, and whatever it was settled into nothing. I stepped out onto the forecourt to get the smell of cold air in my face. The winter air had a wet, metallic tang. The pumps hissed softly in the pause between customers. From where I stood, the light over pump 5 had settled into a steady low buzz, and then a little wind picked up, nothing harsh, just a draft that moved the paper cups in the dispenser. I felt watched in the same way you do when a dog stares at you across a yard, and you know it's not gonna bark. I walked to pump 6, and the CCTV monitor in the office showed nothing but itself. The grid with the channels and the little green dot that says recording. I watched the green dot like a pulse. That's when the pale light appeared above the lot. It was made of a color that doesn't cleanly fit a description. Soft, pale, with a touch of blue that made it look like moonlight through milk. It hovered maybe 30-40 feet above the asphalt, a little to the right of the canopy. It didn't cast shadows the way a normal light would. Instead, its softened edges made the flashing sign across the street look like it had been painted with less attention. When I looked up, the wind died away. The cups stopped rattling. Even the idling SUV seemed like a sound from somewhere else. I watched the light move slow and aimless, no path, just a drift between the tall sign and the tree line. It wasn't high enough to be a plane, not shaped like any drone I'd ever seen at the county fairs or watching fireworks. It was small and precise as a hand's palm hovering a couple of feet from a face. I could feel a pressure in my ears, like when an elevator takes a floor and you notice your sinuses for a second. I went back inside to the monitor. One channel had a weird gray smear in the corner again, but now, on the live feed of pump areas, the pale light was a blank white spot. When the camera image froze, I had that familiar cold wash of wrongness. I could have blamed it on old wiring or the security system needing an update, but our owner is careful about maintenance. His sarcasm is really a veneer for thriftiness, and he rigs things tight. He'd have mentioned it if any camera was spotty enough to blame on hardware. One of my coworkers, Luis, he usually works the graveyard with me on weekends, came in for his break and leaned against the counter with his jacket half on. He looked like a man you wake to make coffee at 3 when you had the right amount of sleep. "You see that light?" he said without the usual preamble. There was a pause like the endings of sentences on the radio. "Yeah." My voice sounded small in the cavern of the store. He didn't smile. He told me he'd been outside by pump 1 filling the paper towel bin, and he'd felt like his phone was losing charge faster, even though it read normal. He'd seen something on the asphalt like oil slick, but solid. He said his teeth had been buzzing. I heard the same static in his wording I'd heard from callers on the talk show when they're sitting in the dark on the couch saying they saw something weird. We went out together. The light hovered, slow as a thought, and when we moved, it edged away like a cat slipping from the foot of the couch. Luis kept glancing over at the trees. "Like eyes," he said, "watching without looking." He didn't sound like he was joking. I walked to the far edge of the lot where the parking ends and the gravel starts. The light drew a lazy circle over the next block, and every time I tried to get a camera on it, my phone fumbled. A black square where the image should be, a message that the camera app had crashed. I thought about grabbing one of those old disposable cameras off the shelf, not for the picture, just because that absence of instant recording felt like proof in and of itself, and then I laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. The light tilted, not like it was nodding, but like it was angling a face. For a second, I thought it was going to come straight at me. It didn't. It drifted past the sign that says 24 hours and washed over the painted arrows on the pavement. The arrows blurred. The light brightened just enough that I could see faint mist above the asphalt, the kind that comes off from a warm engine in a cold air pocket. Then, without any build, it winked out like someone snapped their fingers. The lot snapped back as if a filter had been removed. The hummed tone from the canopy light washed back into a single frequency buzz. The radio came alive mid-sentence. A car rolled in at pump 3 with a soft whine, and the attendant's radio on his shoulder crackled to life. People kept their faces level as if they had shrugged something off because it was easier than facing whatever else it might be. Luis and I stood for a while, hands jammed in our pockets, tasting coffee heat and motel detergent. We checked the camera footage afterward because we always do. The system recorded cleanly right up until 2:16 a.m. And then there was a blank of 5 seconds where all 4 channels showed nothing, then static, then normal. The timestamps blipped when the blank hit. There's no honest explanation on the timestamp, no glitch report except the black gap. I finished my shift at 5. The sky lightened, the first buses rolled in toward downtown, commuters who looked like they came from a different reality. I locked the door and drove home through streets waking with the smell of breakfast and diesel. I told myself, as I always do after nights like that I'd slept enough for it to be, or my brain trying to pattern things, because patterns are what brains do. I told myself a lot of things. At my kitchen table the next morning, I checked the online feeds for the gas chain. No other stores reported anything out of the ordinary. A customer called a head office to complain about the vending machine exact change. No local news vans rolled through. It felt small in the daylight, the way things that make your stomach drop at 2 a.m. often do. I went back to that pump to touch the metal where the shadow had slid. It was cool and ordinary, no hairs out of place. The asphalt was clean, the arrows pointed to the exit. But every time the afternoon light hit the canopy in a certain way, I could swear I saw the memory of that pale glow at the edge of my vision, sliding like a bad film splice. Sometimes when I stand at that same counter now, the radio in its corner speaks for a second too long on a caller who says nothing, and I remember the slow movement of the shadow and that soft hovering light, and how both of them slipped away the moment you looked right at them. No one came back the next night to tell me they'd seen what I saw. The reports stayed tidy. I worked the shift and ran the shop the way you run it. Change out the paper, sweep beneath the fridges, joke with customers about the weather. The lot stayed lit. The cameras kept rolling. The world kept its busy little hum, oblivious or wise in its own way. But I drive past that corner sometimes after my shift, watching the pumps from my car, and more than once I've had the exact same half expectation that something will move across it. I don't look for it. I don't try to catch it. I just keep my eyes open in the way people do who've been through something they can't explain. Alert, a little careful, making more space in their mind for the things that don't line up. I was finishing my last round at the industrial park around 3:30 a.m., just pushing a mop through the main lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed in that low, uneven rhythm you get when they're too old, and the hum from the HV made it feel like the building itself was breathing. It was cold for early September, the kind of night that still carries a late summer warmth, but sneaks in a sharp bite whenever a door opens. I had my headphones in, playing an old country station on my phone, just enough to keep my mind off the emptiness of the place. It's always quiet that late, too quiet. And that night, it was quieter than normal. I noticed it when I stepped out of the East Side service door to grab the trash from the loading dock. The lot was empty, like always, but something about it felt wrong. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought someone had slipped out of a car or was hiding behind a truck. A figure glowed faintly, pale and white, and it moved across the lot like it wasn't touching the ground. Not walking, exactly, sliding almost. I froze. The shape was vaguely human, but it was like it was wrapped in light or fog. I squinted, thinking the reflection from the overhead security lights had gone weird, but every light in the lot was steady and the glow didn't match any of them. It passed behind a line of trailers and just disappeared. No sound at all. No crunch of gravel, no car engine, nothing. I stood there for a while, just staring, waiting for it to reappear, but it didn't. My first thought was that I'd imagined it, maybe caught a reflection on my glasses or a trick of the shadows, but my stomach had that tight, cold twist you get when you know you didn't imagine it. I tried to shake it off and finished my rounds, though I kept glancing out the windows. Around 5 a.m., I went outside to lock up the east doors, and that's when I saw something else. A small car parked on the far side of the lot, headlights off, engine quiet. I hadn't noticed it when I'd come in at 11 p.m. and there was no one in sight. I figured maybe a coworker had left it overnight. Didn't make sense, but I didn't think much of it at first. The lot's big enough that people sometimes sneak in to sleep or just park for a while. I finished locking up and walked back to my own car, trying to ignore the creeping feeling in my chest. Around 6 a.m., the sun was just starting to touch the horizon, washing the lot in pale light. I got to my car and froze again. 2 men were standing there right by my driver's side, both dressed in black suits that looked new, pressed, hats. Their faces were pale, almost featureless in the dawn light, and they didn't look like anyone I recognized from the park. "Morning," one said. His voice was calm, even like reading a script. "Were the security lights malfunctioning last night?" I blinked. I don't think so." I kept my keys in my hand. I didn't notice anything. Everything looked fine. The second man nodded slowly. "Good, we just wanted to check. Very easy for something to go unnoticed when the building's empty." I nodded, feeling stupid and nervous. My eyes flicked between them and my car. "Right?" There was a pause. They didn't smile, they didn't fidget, just stared like they were expecting me to say more. I didn't. My throat went dry. "You're the janitor?" the first one asked. I swallowed. "Yeah." "Nothing else unusual?" the second asked. I hesitated. I wanted to tell them about the glowing figure. Part of me thought I should just run, but something about the way they stood there, too calm, too sure, made me feel like even saying it aloud could get me in trouble. So I just shook my head. They nodded again. "Good. Have a safe day." They walked toward the edge of the lot, moving without turning, keeping that quiet, smooth pace. I watched them go until they disappeared behind the row of trailers. I got in my car and sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, thinking about the figure I'd seen. The lot had been empty, no cameras showing anything out of the ordinary, and yet I couldn't shake the image. The glow, the way it moved, the way those 2 men had appeared exactly when I left. When I got home, I told my wife, but she just laughed and said it was a weird dream or maybe a prank. I wasn't so sure. I've worked that night shift for 2 years, and nothing like that had ever happened. Usually, the most interesting thing was a raccoon knocking over a trash bin or some trucker stopping for coffee before dawn. That afternoon, I drove past the park. Everything looked normal. The lights worked. The lot was empty. But I kept thinking about those two men. I tried to convince myself they were just contractors, some kind of security inspectors, but their timing, the questions, they weren't normal. Not that calm, not that precise. A week later, I asked a coworker if anyone had been in the lot early that morning. He shook his head. Nope, didn't see anyone unusual. You sure you weren't dreaming? I said nothing. Sometimes I catch myself looking for them, driving past the park at night, checking the lot. I've seen strange reflections in the windows, shadows that move too smoothly. Once I thought I saw the glowing figure on the edge of the tree line behind the trailers, but it vanished before I could get close. I haven't seen them again, the two men, and I don't know if I want to. But every time I pass that lot or hear the hum of those old fluorescent lights, that tight, cold feeling comes back. I still think about it most nights when I walk out to my car after a shift. The figure, the men, the questions, and I keep wondering what they wanted to know about the lights, about me, about the lot. I keep telling myself I imagined it all. Maybe I did, but I know what I saw, and I know those men were real enough to stand there in front of me, just at dawn, like the world hadn't even noticed them. I drive past the lot slower now, windows up, lights on. I park under a street lamp when I have to go inside at night, just in case. And sometimes, if I catch the corner of my eye just right, I swear I can see that same pale glow sliding across the lot, and I remember that morning, the way the world felt small, quiet, and like it wasn't entirely mine. I never tell anyone at work, never bring it up, but every shift I finish, every quiet lot I leave, I feel the weight of their gaze, even when I'm alone. I was on my little boat, a 24-foot center console named the Minnow, somewhere off the northern coast of Maine. I usually didn't head out past 10 o'clock, but that night I had some fish to clean up from earlier trips, and the moon was almost full, so I figured the light would be enough. The water was calm, the sort that felt almost syrupy in the dead of night, and there was a sharp cold in the air, the kind that sinks into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I'd just gotten the lines in and was rinsing the deck when it happened. At first, I thought it was a lighthouse or another boat, but nothing on the radar. Then a beam of white light, really bright, cut across the water. It came from above the clouds, like a searchlight, but wrong. Too steady, too precise. Not swinging, not blinking, just sliding across the waves as if someone were sweeping them with a ruler. I froze. The beam was cold. I mean, the air around it almost seemed to suck the warmth out of me. My teeth were chattering, and my hands went numb even though I was wearing gloves. The water underneath the light looked like it had been bleached. It wasn't reflecting like moonlight. It was like the water itself had lost color. I tried to get the engine going to move away, but my fingers were slow, fumbling over the controls. Every instinct told me to just get out of there, but I didn't move. The light didn't just shine in one place. It slid in a pattern, almost like it was searching, and I couldn't tell if it was looking for me or for something else. Then, just like that, it clicked off. Not dimmed, not faded, just gone. The darkness returned instantly, thick and wet, like someone had pulled a blanket over the ocean. I sat there shaking, staring at nothing but black waves, trying to rationalize. Maybe a helicopter? Maybe some kind of weather drone? But no noise, not a hum, not a motor, nothing. Just silence and the water. That water. It was normal again, but colder than before, and it didn't make sense. I started heading back to the marina, keeping the engine steady. The waves lapped normally, but the sound felt different, hollow somehow. I tried talking to myself, out loud, to keep calm. I even cursed at the darkness, like shouting could make it less heavy. Nothing changed. A few minutes in, I noticed the fog. It wasn't dense, just a thin veil rising off the water, but it moved unnaturally, almost like it was being pulled along by something. It didn't swirl with the wind, it didn't drift, it just shifted slowly, smoothly, like it had a pattern of its own. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks, eyes adjusting to black water and moonlight, but my stomach told me otherwise. Then I noticed the compass needle flick. Just a tiny jump, like someone tapped it, then it snapped back. Twice. 3 times. It never pointed away from north, but it hesitated. That shouldn't happen, especially not this far out with no metal overhead except my boat. I tried to call someone on the radio, the VHF, just to confirm I wasn't losing it. No response, just static. And then the weirdest thing, the static started sounding almost like breathing. Not mechanical interference, but a low, even hiss, like someone was right behind the speaker, inhaling and exhaling. My heart slammed, and I slammed the radio down. I glanced up at the clouds, thick now, low, and then I saw a faint glow behind them, almost imperceptible at first, like a lantern in a foggy window. It didn't move like an airplane light or a buoy, just hovered, steady, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No fade, no blink, nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd been staring at the black water too long, that the cold and fatigue were making me see things. I kept moving, slowly. But the feeling stayed, like someone or something was watching from above, waiting for me to slip up, waiting to see if I noticed. Every small sound, the slap of a wave against the hull, a gull far in the distance, the motor vibrating, felt amplified. I was on edge the entire way in. Halfway back, I swear I felt the water under the hull shift differently, heavier somehow, like I was moving through a pocket of air and then into a pocket of something else. It wasn't waves or currents I recognized. The boat didn't rock, but the motion in my stomach told me something was off. I slowed down, just floating for a second, and noticed the silence. Not even the hum of the engine seemed right. The ocean around me had this hollow, muted quality, like the world had temporarily lost depth. When I finally saw the lights of the marina, it felt like stepping into a separate universe. Normal, warm, human. I called the harbor master to tell him I'd be in, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Who would believe a beam of light cutting across the water, searching? Who would believe the fog moved like it had a mind, the compass flicking, the radio hissing like someone breathing? I tied the boat up and sat in the cabin, staring at the water through the window. Everything looked fine, quiet, peaceful. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that part of the ocean I'd been in was different now, like it had been touched by something I couldn't see. I went home after that, warmed up, ate some food, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white light cutting across black water, smooth and relentless. I kept imagining it sliding, always searching, moving with a precision no human could manage. In the morning, I checked the boat. Nothing seemed damaged, nothing out of place. The waterline was normal, no signs anything had been below the surface except me and the usual marine life. Even the fog had disappeared. But I could still feel it, in my fingers, in my chest, in the way the air smelled faintly metallic and cold when I breathed. I took the boat out a few nights later, tried to retrace my route. Nothing. No light, no fog, no feeling. Just water, black and indifferent under the moon. But the memory stuck, the weight of that moment pressing down. It's been a couple months, and I still think about it. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I imagine that beam sliding across my backyard, searching, precise, silent. I tell myself it was a trick of the mind, or a strange weather phenomenon, or some kind of plane or helicopter I didn't see. But nothing fits perfectly. Nothing explains the cold in the air, the way the water looked drained of color, the way the fog moved, or the radio. I haven't been back out past 10 o'clock since. The boat sits tied up in the marina, quiet. I still go out for day trips, nothing late at night, nothing past the regular routes. But sometimes when I'm alone on the water near dusk, I feel the weight of that beam again, pressing down, and I keep my head down, my hands steady, and I move. I've thought about trying to tell someone, Coast Guard, scientists, even a friend. But who would believe it? Not the way I remember it. It's real to me. That light was real. The cold was real. The silence was real. Everything else, I don't know. And that's the part that sticks the most. Not the beam itself, but that something like it could exist above the clouds, moving with purpose, unseen, and then just stop. I still see flashes of it when I blink. I still hear the faint hissing in quiet rooms, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch myself staring at the sky, wondering if it's watching back.